This video continues with Chapter 61 assessment. I, who also transmigrated simultaneously, have a slight understanding of human nature. Chapter 61 assessment. My Asachi has awakened, Instructor Kitahara Hiroyuki. In a quiet corner of the courtyard outside the kendo hall, Yadi held his strange-looking bone blade and spoke to the kendo instructor, Instructor Kitahara Hiroyuki. Student Yadi. Instructor Kitahara Hiroyuki turned his head in confusion to look at the Asachi in Yadi's hand, which had completely changed its appearance. Yadi was holding a bone blade. The blade was slender and gleamed with a cold, metallic luster. At the end of the hilt, a ferocious white skull was clearly visible, its hollow eye sockets seemingly staring at something. Realizing what had happened, Instructor Kitahara Hiroyuki's eyes widened instantly, and his jaw almost dropped to the floor. This hasn't even been a month yet, right? Instructor Kitahara Hiroyuki's voice rose with extreme shock, and he said with a slight tremor to actually have awakened its true name already? How is this possible? Instructor Kitahara Hiroyuki had taught for many years and had seen geniuses, but he had never seen such an outrageous speed. Toshiro Hitsugeya, sensing the call before enrollment, was already a legend at Shino Academy. And yet, here was student Yadi, who had completed the true name awakening only a month after receiving his Asachi. Yes. Yadi continued, I can already perform Shikai. Yadi focused his mind, and a faint, almost imperceptible gleam flashed through the eye sockets of the skull on the bone blade's hilt. Shika. Instructor Kitahara Hiroyuki felt as if his heart was about to jump out of his chest. Less than a month to communicate, awaken the true name, and even perform an initial Shikai. This could no longer be described as a genius. He was simply a monster. He was an existence that overturned his understanding. Instructor Kitahara Hiroyuki took a few deep breaths, forcibly suppressing his churning emotions. A light never seen before burst from his eyes. Excitedly, he grabbed Yadi by the shoulder and said, Student Yadi, this is truly wonderful. It's astonishing. Your aptitude is unprecedented. It must not be wasted on basic courses. Instructor Kitahara Hiroyuki's voice trembled with excitement as he said, Let's go. Come with me now to submit a special application. We will apply for personal instruction from the head captain. With your aptitude, you are absolutely qualified. Although you might still need an assessment after the application is approved, based on your combat skills and the speed of this Shikai, I believe you will definitely pass. Inside the majestic and ancient 1st Division headquarters, incense smoke curled slowly. Head Captain Yamamoto sat behind a massive desk, reviewing a mountain of documents. Lieutenant Sasakabe Chijiro appeared silently using shunpo and respectfully handed over a special application from Shino Academy. Head Captain, Lieutenant Sasakabe Chijiro said clearly, Student Yadi, a freshman from the 999th class of Shino Academy, has submitted a special instruction application, hoping to receive your personal guidance. Head Captain Yamamoto's brush paused slightly, and he raised his eyes to look at the lieutenant. Lieutenant Sasakabe Chijiro continued his report. When this student enrolled, his spiritual pressure was measured at the 5th level, which is already rare. Even more astonishing is that within less than a month of receiving his Asachi from the academy, he completed soul communication and true name awakening with the Asachi, and is already capable of performing an initial Zanpakuto Shikai. At the same time, according to the report from Kendo Instructor Kitahara Hiroyuki, his combat instincts and physical fitness are extremely formidable, far surpassing his peers. According to the Serite Soul Registration Archives, Lieutenant Sasakabe Chijiro turned a page and continued. Yadi is a special soul discovered by chance by a Shinigami under the Shihoin family in the 80th district of West Rukengai. Because of his exceptional aptitude, he was recommended through the Shihoin family's channels and was admitted to Shino Academy ahead of schedule. Lieutenant Sasakabe Chijiro added, additionally, when this child arrived at the outskirts of the Serite, before the Shino Academy entrance examination had even begun, his non-human form and frequent crossing of Rukengai district's triggered pursuits by multiple patrol teams of Shinigami. However, during the pursuits, student Yati displayed extraordinary movement speed and perception abilities. Not a single Shinigami could catch up to student Yati. Head Captain Yamamoto listened quietly and tapped his aged fingers on the desk twice, making a dull thudding sound. A hint of approval flashed in the head captain's eyes as he slowly said, "Less than a month to communicate, awaken the true name, and perform Shikai, 5th level spiritual pressure, extraordinary physique." This child's talent is indeed rare. The Shihoin family has unearthed a raw gem for the Serete. The head captain pondered for a moment and made a decision: send an order to Shino Academy. Grant Yati permission to study courses from all grade levels, with priority on mastering the 4 arts: Zanjutsu, Hakuda, Ho-Ho, and Kaido. As for resources, provide him with the highest level of priority. Head Captain Yamamoto paused and set the assessment goal. If he can awaken his Zanpakudo to the Bankai realm within 1 year, allow him to join the 1st Division and study under me. Understood, Head Captain. Lieutenant Sasakibe Chijiro bowed and accepted the order, his figure vanishing like smoke as he went to convey the command. Lieutenant Sasakibe Chijiro was also slightly shaken inside, thinking to himself, to complete Bankai within a year. This assessment standard is so similar to when the head captain took me as his lieutenant 1,000 years ago. It seems the head captain holds extraordinary expectations for this child. Deep within the 2nd Division headquarters, the atmosphere was dim and quiet. Lieutenant Merchio Amida's slightly chubby figure hurried through the corridor with a hint of urgency on his face as he knocked on the door of the captain's office. "Captain Soifan." Amida pushed the door open, his voice slightly breathless as he said, "Just received news. That genius freshman from Shino Academy, Yati, the one with the 5th level spiritual pressure, has actually applied for and received the qualification for personal instruction from the head captain. And the head captain gave him an assessment. If he achieves Bankai within a year, he can join the 1st Division. I heard he was discovered in the West 80th District by someone under our 2nd Division. The Shihoin family. Captain, this is a genius who has caught the eye of the head captain. Should we make contact early, before he is claimed, and invite him to join our stealth force after he graduates? People like this, a genius." The captain's large chair was turned away from the door, and only the top of the back of the chair and a sliver of purple hair could be seen. "No need." A cold and calm female voice came from behind the chair, interrupting Amida's rambling. The speaker was the captain of the 2nd Division, commander-in-chief of the stealth force, and leader of the punishing force, Captain Soifan. Merchio Amida was stunned, thinking he had misheard, and asked again, "Captain, this is a genius valued even by the head captain. His aptitude is almost equivalent to Captain Hitsugea's back in the day. Are you sure we shouldn't?" "No need." Captain Soifan's voice remained without a ripple, refusing the lieutenant's suggestion once again. Merchio Amida opened his mouth, looked at the motionless chair back, and finally swallowed his remaining words. He responded somewhat dejectedly, "Yes, Captain, I understand." He silently exited the captain's office and gently closed the door. In the dim captain's office, Captain Soifan slowly turned around. She held a detailed intelligence file about Yati, her gaze scanning the keywords West 80th District, discovered by Shinigami under the Shihoin family, non-human form, and extraordinary speed and perception repeatedly and sharply. She subconsciously rubbed the edge of the file with her fingers, complex emotions swirling in her heart that were difficult to describe. Finally, all these emotions turned into a whisper so faint it was almost inaudible. "Yorwichi-sama, is that you?" Inside the single dormitory, assigned to Yati by Shino Academy. Yati sat cross-legged on the tatami mat, holding the document conveying the head captain's order. "Within a year, complete Bankai." Yati stared at the handwriting on the paper, his thoughts churning. What a familiar assessment standard. 1,000 years ago, Lieutenant Sasakibe Chijiro achieved the world-shocking feat of completing Bankai within a month, which allowed him to stay by the head captain's side and become his most trusted lieutenant. And he even left an unhealable scar on the head captain's head, using his Bankai ability. In the head captain's eyes, completing Bankai within a year is actually an expected goal. Yadi shook his head slightly, feeling the harsh standards the strongest Shinigami of the Soul Society in 1,000 years held for geniuses. Yadi calmed his mind and carefully sensed the Mugen Gakatsu that had fused with his bones. He could clearly perceive that this power was still separated from the final transformation, Bankai, by a thick barrier. It's not that the accumulation is insufficient, nor is it a lack of soul resonance. Yadi speculated about the current state of his Zanpakuto. It is missing some kind of external, key trigger, or puzzle piece. Yadi thought of the dark red mark on the skull of the hilt, absorbed from the mysterious stone, and secretly thought, perhaps it has to do with that, or maybe it's more than that. For Yadi to complete a true Bankai in a short time, the hope was indeed slim. But the time limit and threshold set by the head captain were an excellent opportunity for Yadi to increase his strength. Disguise. A wise light flashed in Yadi's eyes, and he thought to himself, since I cannot truly Bankai in a short time, I will use the Shikai skill, Bone Invisibility, as a foundation to perform a deep disguise and create a pseudo-Bankai that is convincing enough to pass for the real thing. First, I need to make some slight changes to the second Shikai skill, at least so that the fact that I need to extract ribs to use the skill won't be exposed to other Shinigami. Then, I will link and upgrade the two Shikai skills to form a combat system that looks very complete, is very powerful, and fits the criteria of a Bankai. It also needs to fit the system I will use for fighting with my clone in the future. A year is definitely enough time to complete a Bankai. As long as he completes the development of the pseudo-Bankai within a year, he can leave Shino Academy, and his freedom in terms of identity will greatly increase. Then he could start investigating the strange aura on his Zanpakuto, and, by the way, determine how much longer it would be until the Shinigami plot began. Yadi packed up the document that had been sent to him, closed his eyes, and held the clone's bone blade with both hands, but his mind entered the Zanpakuto that had merged with his bones, and he began the development of the pseudo-Bankai. Chapter 62 Study. The morning sunlight filtered through the paper window, casting soft spots of light inside Yadi's single dormitory room. Writing up to here, I hope readers remember our domain, Taiwan Novel Network, with a vast collection, twcan.com, for you to read at your leisure. Yadi was sitting quietly with his eyes closed, organizing his thoughts on how to fake a Bankai, when a knock came at the door. Knock, knock, please come in. Yadi opened his eyes and said. The door slid open, and a tall, burly figure stood at the entrance. The person who arrived was not the 1st Division member Yadi had expected, but the 7th Division captain, Sajin Kamamura, wearing heavy brown armor and his signature bamboo hat. Student Yadi. Captain Kamamura's deep voice came from beneath the hat. Captain Kamamura extended a huge palm holding a document stamped with a special seal and said, I am here to deliver something. This certificate is a cross-grade study permit personally approved by the head captain. With this certificate, you may audit classes at any grade level at Shino Academy, and the study resource library will also be open to you with the highest level of access. Yadi reached out to take the certificate and said, Thank you for delivering this personally, Captain Kamamura. It is no trouble. Kamamura nodded slightly, his gaze beneath the hat seemingly filled with appreciation. He nodded again and said, Your talent is the greatest I have ever seen in my life. To be able to awakening your Zanpakuto to the Shikai level in less than a month, and to possess lieutenant-level spiritual pressure and powerful physical fitness upon enrollment. The head captain has high expectations for you. I hope you will be diligent and not fail your own talent. Your future will surely see you become a pillar of the Godai. Captain Kamamura's tone was sincere, filled with expectations for a junior. Yadi replied, I will do my best. At the same time, he had a lingering doubt. Why did the 7th Division captain come to deliver the document personally? Kamamura seemed to see through his thoughts. He slowly raised his huge palm and took off the bamboo hat that covered his face. Beneath the hat was a wolf face covered in thick brown fur, resembling a corgi. Yadi's pupils contracted slightly, and with a hint of feigned surprise, he said, "So, Captain is also not a human-shaped soul." "Indeed." Kamamura's voice was calm as he said, "I am of the werewolf clan. Our ancestors committed a grave sin, causing our entire clan to fall forever into the beast realm. Even after death, we cannot be liberated, trapped in this form for eternity, unable to be reincarnated." Captain Kamamura put his hat back on and continued. "Fortunately, the head captain valued me and took me into the Serete, entrusting me with the heavy responsibility of protection, guarding the peace of the head captain and the Central 46. Unable to be reincarnated for eternity." Yadi understood in his heart. No wonder the werewolf clan had few members in the original work. This cursed fate was too heavy. Having understood the reason for Captain Kamamura's visit, Yadi followed up on his words. "I am not clear about my own race. This is how I looked when I woke up. A friend suggested I come to the Serete to learn the power of the Shinigami, so I came." Captain Kamamura nodded and said, "I have also heard about what happened to you in Rukangai. I originally planned to go find you after my guard duty at Shino Academy ended, but I didn't expect you to have already enrolled and even gained the favor of the head captain." The two chatted for a while longer. Kamamura encouraged Yadi again, telling him he could seek his help if he encountered any difficulties, and then he took his leave. Looking at the cross-grade certificate in his hand, Yadi knew the real challenge was just beginning. The next day, at the second-year Hakuda training ground, the floor was covered with thick mats. When Yadi walked in with the certificate, the students who were warming up for sparring instantly quieted down. All eyes focused on this legendary half-month Shikai genius, and the air was filled with excitement. "Look, it's Yadi. He really came, cross-grade learning for Hakuda. Such strong pressure, and he hasn't even released his spiritual pressure." The teacher in charge of teaching Hakuda, Yashio Yamamura, was a middle-aged Shinigami with a lean physique and muscles like cast steel. Teacher Yamamura swept a sharp gaze over Yadi, the corners of his mouth curling into a smile as he said, "Student Yadi, welcome to the second-year Hakuda class. The students are sparring. After all, actual combat is the only standard for testing the truth. Come, you shall spar with me." Yashio Yamamura had already heard about Yadi's combat talent from the first-year swordsmanship teacher, so he didn't waste any words. He immediately assumed a stance, a steady, mountain-like spiritual pressure flowing out naturally. Seeing this, the surrounding students stopped their sparring, quickly dispersing to form a large circle, preparing to witness the genius's performance. "Please teach me, teacher." Yadi stood still calmly. "Huh?" With a low shout, Yashio Yamamura shot out like a cannonball. A fierce and swift punch aimed straight at Yadi's face, the force of the fist sharp. Yadi's eyes narrowed, his body moving like a willow catkin in the wind. In the split second before the fist touched his hair, his head tilted at an incredible angle, narrowly dodging the punch. So fast, the observing students exclaimed. Yashio Yamamura didn't pause. The moment his punch missed, he sank his waist and rotated his hips, sweeping out his left leg like a steel whip in a vicious low kick aimed at Yadi's shin. At the same time, his right hand turned from a fist into a palm, a concealed hand blade silently slicing toward Yadi's neck, attacking from above and below, sealing off any space for evasion. However, Yadi seemed to have predicted his combination of moves. The moment Yamamura sank his waist, Yadi had already retreated half a step. His body twisted slightly like a water snake, letting the fierce low kick graze past his leg. At the same time, he raised his left hand, blocking seemingly casually, but precisely parrying the tricky hand blade. Hiss, a collective intake of breath, sounded from the sidelines. They saw it clearly. Yadi was relying entirely on his superb reaction speed, dynamic vision, and control over his body's limits to deal with the teacher's attacks. There was no trace of using any Hakuda moves. The next few minutes became a show of Yashio Yamamura's storm-like offensive and Yadi's incredible evasion performance. A spinning kick carrying a whistling wind was dodged by Yadi sliding low. A grappling technique attempted to lock Yadi's joints, but he slipped away like an eel. Amidst the interwoven curtain of fists, Yadi's figure swayed and wove like a ghost, not a single leaf touching him. The more Yashio Yamamura fought, the more alarmed he became, fine beads of sweat seeping from his forehead. He felt as if he wasn't sparring with a student, but trying to capture an invisible flow of Raizhi. Yadi's learning ability was even more terrifying. From purely dodging at the beginning, he later began to consciously imitate his force-generating methods and footwork, and could even predict some of his habitual combo openers. Good lad, you learn fast. Yashio Yamamura's battle intent grew stronger in his eyes. He shouted and unleashed a Hakuta combo move, close quarters continuous iron mountain lean. Yashio Yamamura's figure blurred instantly. Using Shunpo to close the distance, he sank his shoulder and gathered his strength, his entire body slamming fiercely into Yadi's chest like a battering ram. A flash of light shone in Yadi's eyes. He no longer retreated. Instead, facing Yamamura's charge, he stomped his left foot forward half a step, sank his waist, and rotated his hips. His body tilted slightly, and his right shoulder also gathered a powerful force, imitating Yamamura's previous shoulder strike method, but with greater speed and a trickier angle. Bang! A dull, drum-like boom exploded in the training ground. Two massive forces collided violently. The air wave spread out from the center of the two, blowing the clothes of the surrounding students. Yadi's figure swayed slightly, but he stood firmly as if rooted to the ground. And Yashio Yamamura, who had initiated the charge, was actually pushed back 3 steps by the recoil force before stabilizing himself. Yashio Yamamura's face was filled with incredulous shock. The whole place was deathly silent. You could hear a pin drop. The students were completely dumbfounded. They had witnessed with their own eyes Yadi going from a pure dodger to, in the span of a single sparring session, not only learning teacher Yamamura's signature shoulder strike technique, but even relying on stronger physical fitness, and the essence of force generation he grasped in an instant to forcefully counter the teacher himself. This learning speed and combat instinct simply transcended the category of a genius. He could be called a monster. Yashio Yamamura steadied his breath. Looking at the still calm Yadi opposite him, he suddenly burst into loud laughter, his laughter filled with satisfaction and admiration. Ha 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 ha! Good, good, good! Yadi, I have taught for decades and have never seen someone as brilliant and talented as you. These basic Hakuta moves no longer hold any secrets for you. I have nothing left to teach you. A few days later, when Yadi's figure appeared at the third-year Shunpo training ground, it caused a sensation as well. The person in charge of Shunpo teaching was Ryasu Kuchiki, a Shinigami from a branch family of the Kuchiki clan who excelled in speed. He explained the essence of Shunpo with a serious expression. The core of Shunpo lies in the instantaneous compression and explosion of spiritual pressure. Constructing a spiritual pressure pedal under your feet to propel your body for high-speed movement. The stronger the spiritual pressure and the more precise the control, the faster, steadier, and further the Shunpo. Now, I will demonstrate the basic Shunpo trajectory. Ryasu Kuchiki's figure flashed, leaving a faint afterimage in place, and instantly appeared at a target point 50 meters away. His movements were smooth and swift, drawing exclamations of admiration from the students. Yadi silently perceived the fluctuations of spiritual pressure under the opponent's feet while he moved. For Yadi, who possessed the Dominator talent, his control over the Raizhi he released had reached a microscopic level, coupled with his massive 5th-class spiritual pressure. The basic principle of this Shunpo was as simple and clear as a dog barking. When it was the student's turn to practice, Yadi stood at the starting point, his mind stirring slightly. With almost no obvious precursor of spiritual pressure explosion, Yadi's figure instantly vanished from the spot. The next moment, he had precisely appeared at the 50-meter target point where Ryasu Kuchiki had just demonstrated. Only a barely perceptible ripple of air was left at the starting point. Ryasu Kuchiki's pupils shrank when he saw this. It was only his first time performing Shunpo, yet this speed was already on par with his own. The key was that Yadi's movement trajectory was extremely smooth, and his spiritual pressure fluctuations were restrained to the extreme, demonstrating Yadi's terrifying control over Raizhi. Yadi did not stop. His figure vanished again. Swish, 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 swish. Yadi's figure flickered like a ghost. Between the complex obstacle posts, he pulled out streaks of hard-to-capture white afterimages, sometimes charging in a straight line, sometimes making right-angle turns, sometimes circling at high speed. Every movement was incredibly precise, the landing points without a hair's breadth of error, as if he had practiced it thousands of times. At the same time, Yadi's speed was getting faster and faster, eventually even creating a sharp sound of breaking the air. In less than half an hour, the entire training ground was left with only the long lingering white afterimage trails left by Yadi's high-speed movement, while he himself returned to the starting point, calm and collected, as if he had never left. The whole place was silent. All the students had their mouths wide open, as if petrified. Ryasuk Kuchiki's face was even more complex, filled with shock, bitterness, and even more disbelief. In less than a day, the opponent had practiced basic shunpo to a realm that surpassed him, the teacher. Student Yadi. Ryasuk Kuchiki's voice said dryly, your shunpo no longer needs these basic trainings. For the next step, you can refine advanced application techniques like Utsusemi and Senka. Several days later, Kaido Learning Area. The Kaido Training Ground was one of the largest buildings in the academy, divided into multiple teaching areas for teaching Hado, Bakudo, and Kaido, respectively. Several Kaido teachers were scattered throughout, guiding students who had chosen different spellcasting directions. When Yadi stepped into this place, he immediately became the absolute focus. All eyes were focused on him, curious about what miracles this legendary genius could create in the field of spellcasting. Yadi's goal was very clear. Although Shino Academy's graduation requirement only required mastering 20 types of Kaido, Yadi chose to learn them all. Yadi first came to the Hado area and chose the most basic one, Hado 1 Sho. The one in charge of explaining was an old teacher with gray hair. Hado 1 Sho, the foundation of foundations. Its incantation is, Hado 1 Sho. When chanting, you must unify your mind and spirit, guiding Raisi to gather at your fingertips and burst forth with impact force. Look. The old teacher extended his index finger and chanted clearly, Hado 1 Sho. A weak white shockwave shot out, causing the wooden target several meters away to sway. Yadi focused his perception. The incantation could help Shinigami more efficiently mobilize and combine external Raisi. Yadi tried to mobilize his own spiritual pressure to simulate it. The first attempt was silent, with only a small wisp of weak airflow emerging from his fingertip. The second time, accompanied by a low chant of Hado 1 Sho, a white shockwave significantly stronger than the old teacher's whistled out, cracking the wooden target. The third time. The fourth time. Yadi discovered that as long as he deliberately controlled it, even without chanting, he could gather Raisi at his fingertips to form an impact. Although the power was only about 1/10 of the chanted version, and it consumed more mental control, this was already the prototype of an incantation-less Kaido. No incantation. The old teacher's eyes were about to pop out. The finger he used to point at Yadi was trembling as he said, only one day, you can already touch the threshold of incantation-less casting? This control, you are simply a monster in the field of Kaido. Are you interested in coming to check out the Kaido Corps? The Kaido Corps was an organization that researched new types of Kaido, while helping Shinigami release Kaido more conveniently. The teacher's exclamation drew the attention of teachers and students in the entire Hado area. Everyone was stunned by Yadi's terrifying learning speed and Raisi control talent. After mastering the knack for Hado 1 Sho, Yadi seemed to have opened the door to a new world. He traveled tirelessly between various Kaido teachers. He learned Bakudo 1, Sai in the Bakudo area, and Kaido 1, Stop Bleeding in the Kaido area. Yadi was like an insatiable sponge, crazily absorbing the knowledge, incantation rhythms, and Raisi construction methods of various basic Kaido. Although mastering every new Kaido required a lot of time to practice, the visible speed of progress made all the teachers who witnessed it feel their scalps tingle. Bankai, less than 3 months. In just under 3 months, Yadi, relying on that cross-grade proof, swept through all the basic courses of the second, third, and fourth years of Shino Academy like a whirlwind. What Yadi lacked was simply the quantity and proficiency in mastering more mid to high-tier Hado, as well as deeper research into his Zanpakuto. By the standards of Shino Academy, Yadi was already qualified to apply for the graduation assessment. Yadi's rocket-like performance had shockwaves that had long since exceeded Shino Academy, impacting the entire Godai 13. In the first division, Lieutenant Sasakibe Chijiro looked at the incoming information and said, "In less than 3 months, the foundation of the 4 Shinigami arts is complete. Captain Commander, Yadi might be able to achieve Bankai in less than a year." Captain Commander Yamamoto's hand, which was reviewing documents, paused slightly, and he said in a deep voice, "Observe the situation." In the second division, Lieutenant Merchio Amida urged Captain Soifan, Captain, are you really not going to reconsider? That Yadi is simply a monster. Learning anything is as easy as drinking water. He has even touched the edges of incantation-less Hado. It would be a pity to let such talent go." Captain Soifan remained with her back to the door, saying in a flat voice, "Focus on your own duties. I have my own discretion regarding this matter." She held Yadi's latest Hado report in her hand, her knuckles turning slightly white. In the 5th Division barracks, Captain Aizen Sasuk pushed up his glasses, looking at the information about Yadi, a gentle and inscrutable smile hanging on the corner of his mouth. It really is getting more and more interesting. In less than 3 months, he has almost reached the pinnacle of Shino Academy. Where exactly does this talent come from? In the 7th Division barracks, Kamamura Sajin said joyfully, "As expected of someone the Captain Commander has high hopes for. Such speed of improvement is gratifying." In the 8th Division, Captain Kaioraku Shunsui adjusted his hat and said, Yer, what a formidable junior." Nano, it seems the days of us leisurely drinking are about to be disrupted by this rising star who stirs up the winds. Lieutenant Issei Nano pushed up her glasses, analyzed calmly, and said, "Captain, Yadi's talent has already exceeded our predictive models. His growth speed is a bit too fast." 12th Division Captain Mayuri Kuretsuchi looked at the report and let out a neurotic laugh. "Interesting? Too interesting. Non-human form, extraordinary learning speed, terrifying Raisi control, truly an interesting research subject. Truly a genius, Nemu. Immediately retrieve all his physical examination and spiritual pressure data for me." Lieutenant Nemu Kuretsuchi replied, "Yes, Lord Mayuri." Yadi's name, like a thunderclap in a silent land, resounded throughout the Godai 13. At the same time, the Kaido Corps also approved Yadi's application to learn more powerful Hado. The Shinigami skills taught at Shino Academy were all basic, universal Shinigami skills. The spiritual pressure threshold and learning methods for advanced skills meant only a few Shinigami could learn them. Time at Shino Academy flew by as Yadi crazily absorbed knowledge. 3 months later, Yadi's figure was no longer limited to ordinary classrooms, but frequently frequented more mysterious areas within the Serete, the exclusive research and training grounds of the Kaido Corps. Here gathered the group of Shinigami with the deepest research into Hado incantations and new types of secret Hado arts that did not exist in the outside world existed here. In the Kaido Corps, there was an exceptionally sturdy old man with white hair and beard, yet full of vigor, the current Grand Kaido chief, Hyakian Taiksen. This old man, who was forced to come out of retirement because the previous Grand Kaido chief, Hachujin Ashoda, defected, had been circling Yadi all day like he had discovered a rare treasure ever since he witnessed Yadi easily drawing portraits for Kaido Corps members, with multiple low-tier Hado using inhuman Raisi control in the Kaido training ground. Kid, Hado above 90 are forbidden arts. Watch closely, this is the power of a forbidden art. The Raisi around Grand Kaido Chief Hyakian Taiksen became increasingly violent, and a long incantation was emitted, seeping crest of turbidity. Arrogant vessel of lunacy. Boil forth and deny, numb, blink, disturb the sleep. Crawling golden queen of iron, eternally crumbling doll of princess. Betray, I see, ha 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 ha. Sensing the oncoming of my deeds, the warmth of my fingers, the Iron Princess's mutilated body, the puppet's broken limbs, the blind law that governs all, basking in the light of the heavens. Hado 91, Senju Koten Teho. Hado 91, Senju Koten Teho. As his last syllable fell, the violent spiritual pressure in front of his palm instantly collapsed and condensed, turning into countless searing white destructive light cones capable of tearing through space. These light cones intertwined and rotated as if they possessed life, forming a blanket of destructive light that instantly blasted the huge target in the distance, which had been reinforced with multiple defensive barriers, into nothingness. The terrifying aftermath of the explosion made the entire training ground tremble, and the protective barriers flickered violently. Yadi's pupils shrank slightly. He could clearly feel the destructive power contained in this spell, far exceeding any Hado he had learned before. How is it, want to learn? Grand Kaido Chief Hyakian Taiksen stopped, stroking his white beard triumphantly, staring at Yadi with burning eyes. Yadi was silent for a moment, then said in a deep voice, "Chief Taiksen, is it not too dangerous to teach forbidden arts in violation of regulations? I am afraid I may not be able to handle it." Yadi did not fear the power, but was worried that an ungraduated student performing such a flashy forbidden art would attract unnecessary trouble. Ha, dangerous. Grand Kaido Chief Hyakian Taiksen laughed loudly, patting Yadi's shoulder hard and saying, "It might be trouble for others, but for you, kid, you don't have to worry at all. I'll teach you a countermeasure." Grand Kaido Chief Hyakian Taiksen lowered his voice and said, "You just need to practice this Senju Koten Teho until you can abandon the incantation before using it. When you release it, don't be silly and shout the real Hado number, just shout, Hado 31, Shakaho, modified. Just say it's my new secret Hado art. If anyone dares to question it, tell them to come find me to argue." Yadi. He had truly witnessed what there is a policy from above and a countermeasure from below meant, and it was even taught personally by the Grand Kaido Chief. Looking at the old man's, hurry up and praise me for being smart, look, Yadi could only nod helplessly. "I understand. I will practice until I can abandon the chant before using it. Thank you for your guidance, Chief." However, Grand Kaido Chief Hyakian Taiksen's enthusiasm went far beyond this. He excitedly took out even more terrifying inventory. Come, kid. Once you learn 91, come back and learn this too. Hado 92, Kamiharim. Summoning the Pillar of Divine Thunder, the power is even greater. After that, there is Hado 93. Chief, Yadi interrupted quickly. This time, he really felt a hint of panic. Learning one forbidden art could be disguised, but learning a pile of them, even if disguised, would be too conspicuous. Moreover, Yadi vaguely felt that this old man's motives were not pure, so Yadi politely declined. "I have no urgent reason to need these forbidden arts. Greed leads to poor digestion. It is better to first refine what I have already learned." Grand Kaido Chief Hyakian Taiksen was rejected. His white eyebrows immediately stood up, and he said a bit angrily, "Reason? HMPH, I think you just don't realize the true power of Kaido." He glared at Yadi, and finally couldn't help but step closer, whispering in a tone that was almost seductive, in a voice only the two of them could hear. "Kid, tell you the truth. I am teaching you these to let you understand the true power of Kaido, to let you realize what is the strongest power left by the Soul King. As for thinking about Bankai, put that aside for now. You are not an elemental Zanpakuto. Even if you achieve Bankai, you cannot strengthen those matching elemental Kaido forbidden arts." Yadi's eyes narrowed. As expected, he wanted to snatch me away from Captain Commander Yamamoto. Taiksen continued in a fanatical tone. "And then, when you have mastered most of the Kaido forbidden arts, you can naturally join my Kaido Corps. With your talent, the position of the next Grand Kaido Chief will be yours. I have been observing you for a long time. Your control over Raizhi is the best I have ever seen in my life. You are simply a born seed for Kaido. Zanpakuto, that thing is completely dispensable for you. The end of Kaido possesses power sufficient to rival or even surpass the Bankai of a Zanpakuto. As long as you become the Grand Kaido Chief and master those true forbidden arts in the secret collection." Grand Kaido Chief Hyakian Taixin's voice lowered even further, saying with a hint of mystery and heaviness, "I will tell you a secret. A huge secret that concerns the survival of the entire Soul Society. As long as you master the Kaido secret arts and this secret, even if you are a dog, you can obtain a status equal to, or even higher than, the great noble families." The air seemed to freeze. The bait thrown by Grand Kaido Chief Hyakian Taixin was heavy enough to shake the mind of anyone who knew the power structure of the Serite. Yadi was silent for a moment, memories of the hollow churning in his mind, then slowly shook his head, his tone still calm. "Chief Taixin, thank you for your kindness. However, my Zanpakuto is very important to me and is not something dispensable. As for the secret you mentioned concerning the survival of the Soul Society." Yadi paused, a hint of appropriate fear appearing in his eyes, and continued, "I have only been enrolled for half a year and really cannot bear such a heavy responsibility. Please find someone else to tell such an important secret to." "You." Grand Kaido Chief Hyakian Taixin was choked by Yadi's stubborn attitude, his beard curling up in anger. Grand Kaido Chief Hyakian Taixin stared at Yadi for a long time and finally snorted heavily. "Sooner or later, you will understand the greatness of Kaido. You will be conquered by its power." After a while, he seemed unable to hold back, stopped, looked sideways at Yadi and asked, "Then, Hado 92, Kamihurim, are you still going to learn it?" Yadi looked at this old man with a fiery personality and a bit of childish stubbornness, and smiled inwardly. Since the other party's goal had been figured out, and the other party had laid his cards on the table, then these powerful forbidden arts might as well be learned. "I will learn it, but my Bankai already has some clues, and it will definitely not be hindered by the learning of Kaido." Yadi looked at the Grand Kaido Chief and said, "HMPH, whatever, you will inherit the position of Grand Kaido Chief sooner or later anyway." Grand Kaido Chief Hyakian Taixin shook his head and said, then excitedly began to explain the incantation and the key points of spiritual pressure operation for Kamihurim. So in the depths of the Kaido core, one could often see a sturdy old man with white hair and beard, spitting as he explained the terrifying spells in the Forbidden Arts catalog. And in front of him, a white Samiad looked focused, spiritual light flowing around it, carefully attempting to condense that destructive power capable of triggering divine punishment. The surrounding Kaido Corps members had long been accustomed to this, but their gazes towards Yadi were full of awe and a hint of sympathy. During the day, Yadi absorbed the knowledge of these high-tier and even forbidden-tier Kaido like a sponge, honing his, abandoning the incantation technique. At night, he developed and mastered all the skills related to pseudo-Bankai, basically having no time to pay attention to other things. 1 month later. It's time. Yadi dissipated his spiritual pressure, and the final product of the pseudo-Bankai dissipated. Yadi looked towards the direction of the 1st Division barracks and thought, "It's about time. I'll go to the 1st Division tomorrow to report my Bankai results." Yadi had made considerable progress in the development of his Zanpakuto's Shikai ability. The first skill of Shikai, Skull Phantasm's replication range, had become larger. The second skill had already achieved the ability to extract and insert ribs within the body, achieving the effect of rib substitution. And at the same time, Yadi had already stored a large number of ribs in his internal space as combat reserves. Through the different combinations of the two skills, faking a Bankai was more than enough. Chapter 64 makes a stunning debut. The next day, deep within the 1st Division barracks. Inside a specialized cultivation ground, shrouded by a heavy barrier. The air was slightly heavy. Lieutenant Sasakaib Chijiro stood in the center with a serious expression, his gaze sharp as he stared intently at Yadi opposite him. Lieutenant Sasakaib Chijiro had been ordered by the head captain to come and verify the Bankai power of this half-year Bankai genius. Yadi took a deep breath, sinking his consciousness deep into his body. He held his Zanpakuto horizontally before his chest, placing his hands on both sides of the blade, and a deep, restrained spiritual pressure suddenly erupted from Yadi's body. Yadi's low voice echoed within the cultivation ground, carrying a strange rhythm. "Bankai, Seishi Hanso." Hum. There were no earth-shattering visual effects, nor were there any exaggerated weapon transformations. As Yadi clasped his hands together, the Zampacuto before his chest seemed to melt, turning into a pale stream of light that instantly merged into his chest. Immediately after, his entire body seemed to be covered in an indescribable shimmer, his aura becoming even deeper and more restrained, as if he had merged with the surrounding space. The Zampacuto had disappeared. Or rather, it had completely become a part of Yadi's body. Lieutenant Sasakaibe, Chijiro's pupils suddenly contracted to the size of needlepoints. Even with his millennium of experience, having seen countless Bankai, a monstrous wave rose in his heart at this moment. The Zampacuto completely fused with the user's body. This was absolutely not something a normal Bankai could achieve. The Bankai he had seen, whether it was the ice dragon of Hyurin Maru, the flaming hell of Ryujin Jaka, or the thunder domain of his own Ganrya Maru, were all the ultimate changes or expansions of external forms. Yet this state of returning to the basics, of the blade and user becoming one, was unheard of. Yadi's Bankai felt more like a sublimation of life itself. He had originally thought Yadi was at most a half Bankai user who still needed further development, but now it appeared this was definitely a complete, and perhaps even developed to the highest rank, Bankai. Yadi your Banka. Lieutenant Sasakaibe Chijiro's voice carried a hint of imperceptible dryness as he said, "What is its ability?" Yadi maintained that profound state and spoke calmly. Seishi Hanso has two abilities. First, no life, no death. He pointed to himself and said, "In this state, I can highly compress and store my own spiritual pressure. Any damage inflicted upon me, whether it is physical trauma, spiritual pressure impact, or even a fatal wound, can all be offset and repaired by consuming the stored spiritual pressure. As long as my spiritual pressure is not exhausted, I will not die." Immortal! Lieutenant Sasakaibe Chijiro exclaimed, unable to hide the shock on his face anymore. This ability was simply heaven-defying. It meant Yadi would become an unkillable existence on the battlefield. "Please verify, Lieutenant Sasakaibe." Yadi signaled. Lieutenant Sasakaibe Chijiro suppressed his emotions, his eyes becoming sharp as he slowly drew his Zampacuto, Ganryamaru, from his waist, the tip of the blade flashing with sharp electric light. "Be careful." Before the words faded, Lieutenant Sasakaibe Chijiro's figure flashed, his blade light like electricity, instantly slashing across Yadi's forearm. Slash! A cut deep enough to reach the bone appeared, and one could even see the pearly white bone underneath. However, the moment the wound appeared, the shimmer on Yadi's body circulated rapidly, gathering at the wound. No blood splattered. That gruesome wound was wiped away as if by an invisible eraser, instantly healing as if it had never been there. Even the hairs returned to their original state, as if he had never been injured. Lieutenant Sasakaibe Chijiro's eyes narrowed as he swung his blade again, faster and at a trickier angle. Swish, swish, swish. Several consecutive strikes landed on different parts of Yadi's body. Each strike left a shocking wound, but every time, those wounds disappeared instantly amidst the circulating shimmer. Lieutenant Sasakaibe Chijiro stood with his blade sheathed, looking at the unharmed Yadi in silence. His previous attacks hadn't used his full strength, but they were definitely not child's play. Yadi's recovery speed was unbelievably like time reversing. Lieutenant Sasakaibe Chijiro said in a deep voice, "This ability is indeed inconceivable. If I were to attack with full force, what would the result be?" Yadi replied, "Theoretically, as long as I have enough stored spiritual pressure, the effect is the same. Lieutenant, you can try being more aggressive." Lieutenant Sasakaibe Chijiro shook his head slowly and returned Ganryamaru to its sheath. No need. Lieutenant Sasakaibe Chijiro was already 80% convinced. More importantly, he vaguely felt that if he really attacked with full force, he might touch upon some deeper immortality mechanism, which was not suitable for a verification occasion. What about the second ability? Yadi explained, the second ability is formless and faceless. Beside him, spiritual light gathered and quickly condensed into form. A white Samiad figure, exactly the same as Yadi's main body, appeared there. The same build, the same face, even the emitted spiritual pressure fluctuations were almost equivalent to Yadi's main body. It was actually at the lieutenant rank. The only difference was that this clone was covered in white fur and wore no shihakusho. The corner of Lieutenant Sasakai Chijiro's eye twitched violently. A lieutenant rank white dog clone, this visual impact was a bit strong. But Lieutenant Sasakai Chijiro immediately suppressed this bizarre imagery, keenly sensing the clone's spiritual pressure intensity, and his heart was stirred by another massive wave. The clone actually possesses strength equivalent to the main body. Doesn't this mean combat power is instantly doubled? And Yadi's voice interrupted his thoughts. This clone can communicate consciously with the main body and other clones. At the same time, Yadi turned his gaze to Lieutenant Sasakai Chijiro and said, "When the main body is damaged, it can condense a clone with the exact same appearance and build as the source of the damage." As soon as he finished speaking, under Lieutenant Sasakai Chijiro's stunned gaze, the spiritual light beside Yadi gathered again. This time, what condensed was not a Samiad, but a tall, thin, serious-looking middle-aged male figure wearing, nothing at all. That face, that figure, was exactly Lieutenant Sasakai Chijiro himself. A naked Lieutenant Sasakai Chijiro. Lieutenant Sasakai Chijiro, this 1,000-year-old Shinigami, the right-hand man of Head Captain Yamamoto, opened his mouth for the first time in his life in such a serious occasion. His pupils shook. The expression on his face completely froze, as if he had been struck by an invisible heavenly thunder and left charred. He looked at that stark naked, expressionless, yet radiating the same source of aura as himself, and his brain fell into a brief blankness. An indescribable absurdity, shame, and huge impact mixed together, leaving this veteran powerhouse speechless for a moment. The cultivation ground fell into a deathly silence, with only two naked clones standing quietly there, and the calm gaze of the main body, Yadi. After a long while, Lieutenant Sasakai Chijiro finally closed his mouth with difficulty, took a few deep breaths, and barely managed to find his voice, saying with a hint of imperceptible trembling, This ability and the state of the clone, I understand." Lieutenant Sasakai Chijiro felt that the composure he had cultivated for 1,000 years was being challenged like never before at this moment. He forced himself not to look at that naked himself, and refocused his gaze on Yadi's main body, his eyes complex to the extreme. "Yadi, your Bankai, is very unique. I will report truthfully to the head captain." A few days later, the Godai 13 captain's routine meeting, in the majestic meeting hall of the 1st Division. Head Captain Yamamoto stood in the main seat, his cane striking the floor, as he said in a deep voice, "I have summoned you all today to announce something. The new student of the Shino Academy, Yadi, has successfully completed the Bankai of his Zanpakuto a few days ago." As soon as these words were spoken, the solemn atmosphere in the hall was instantly broken. Even though they had been mentally prepared, when the miracle of completing Bankai in half a year was confirmed by the head captain himself, the captains could not hide the shock on their faces. Byakuya Kuchiki frowned slightly. Captain Kairaku Shunsui lowered his straw hat. Captain Anohana Ritsu still smiled. But her eyes were deep. Aizen pushed up his glasses, maintaining a gentle smile. Everyone reacted differently, but all were moved by this news. The details will be explained by Lieutenant Sasakai. Head Captain Yamamoto signaled Lieutenant Sasakai Chijiro to come forward and explain. Lieutenant Sasakai Chijiro stepped forward with a solemn expression, but if one looked closely, a hint of redness still remained on his face. He cleared his throat and began to report. Upon verification, Yadi's Bankai is named Seishi Hanso. Its form is extremely special. The Zanpakuto is completely fused into his body, and Yadi can maintain this Bankai state permanently. Upon hearing this, the captain's expressions changed again. Permanent Bankai. This meant that Yadi's Bankai was completely different in nature from ordinary Bankai. He didn't need to constantly consume massive amounts of spiritual pressure, and it also meant Yadi was in his strongest combat posture at all times. This point alone far exceeded the concept of an ordinary Bankai. Lieutenant Sasakaibe Chijiro continued, "This Bankai possesses two major abilities. First, no life, no death. Yati can store his own spiritual pressure. In this state, any damage inflicted upon him, including physical trauma, spiritual pressure impact, and even fatal injury, can all be instantly offset and repaired by consuming stored spiritual pressure. As long as his stored spiritual pressure is not exhausted, theoretically, he is an immortal being." Hearing this, the captains were stirred, unable to believe it. Immortal? Can even fatal wounds be offset? How is this possible? Byakuya Kuchiki's brows were locked tight. Sajin Kamamura's wolf face under his helmet was full of shock. Captain Yukitake had a worried look, and even head Captain Yamamoto's hand holding his cane tightened slightly. This ability was too overbearing. It meant that facing Yati, without some powerful binding kaido or super strong spiritual pressure recovery ability, one could only be exhausted to death. The threat level on the battlefield skyrocketed. Lieutenant Sasakaibe Chijiro did not pause and threw out the second bombshell. Second, formless and faceless. This ability can condense clones. There are two forms of clones. The ordinary clone is a clone that condenses with the same appearance as the main body and with equivalent spiritual pressure intensity. The ordinary clone's spiritual pressure has indeed reached the lieutenant rank. As for the special clone, Lieutenant Sasakaibe Chijiro's voice carried a hint of weirdness as he said, "When the main body is damaged, it can condense a special clone that is exactly the same in appearance and build as the source of the damage. At the same time, when this ability is activated, it will cause a sensory blurring effect on the enemy main body, interfering with their 5 senses. Copying the enemy. And it can interfere with the main body. This ability was even more insidious and effective. Imagine that in a fierce battle, a self suddenly appears to attack you, and it can also interfere with your senses. The psychological blow and tactical disruption effect were simply outstanding. The captains imagined that scene, and their expressions became somewhat colorful. However, Lieutenant Sasakaibe Chijiro's report was not over yet. He paused, seemingly organizing his language, and finally added in a numb tone, "There is one situation that needs special explanation." Lieutenant Sasakaibe Chijiro looked around and, seeing that all the captains were holding their breath, bit the bullet and said, "All clones condensed by Yati's Bankai, regardless of which form, are not wearing any clothes. If the previous immortality and clones brought strategic level shock, then this final addition was like a basin of ice water poured over the heads of all the captains, instantly plunging them from the peak of shock into indescribable confusion and absurdity." The entire meeting hall fell into a deathly silence, where a pin could be heard dropping. The expressions on the captains' faces were colorful. The corner of Captain Kaioraku Shunsui's mouth under his straw hat twitched wildly, and finally, he couldn't help but let out a ft, quickly covering his mouth with his sleeve, his shoulders shaking violently. Captain Unohana Ritsu's perpetually gentle smile stiffened for a moment, then recovered, but her eyes held a hint of helpless amusement. Byakuya Kuchiki's iceberg-like face showed a crack, his brows furrowed so tightly they could crush a fly, as if he had been subjected to some kind of mental pollution. Captain Yukitake began to cough violently, his face somewhat flushed. Sasuke Aizen's action of pushing his glasses paused, and a flash of extremely rare astonishment flickered in the eyes behind the lenses. Other captains also looked at each other, their expressions strange. Powerful immortality ability, lieutenant rank ordinary clones, special clones that copy enemies, but all clones are naked. Put together, how could it look like anything other than indescribably humiliating? The style of this Bankai instantly changed from a high-end strategic weapon to some kind of perverse mental pollution. Head Captain Yamamoto coughed heavily, his cane striking the floor, startling the captains who had fallen into a bizarre atmosphere. His aged but majestic gaze swept across the room and finally landed on Lieutenant Sasakaibe Chijiro. "Sasakaibe, supplement the verification details." Lieutenant Sasakaibe Chijiro immediately reported the verification process, focusing on the recovery effect of no life, no death, and the authenticity of the clone's spiritual pressure. Of course, he also mentioned that naked himself again, which was indeed exactly the same. After hearing the detailed report, Head Captain Yamamoto's white eyebrows also twitched imperceptibly. Head Captain Yamamoto was silent for a moment and made a ruling. Yadi's Bankai, the ability is true, the power is strong, and the assessment requirements have indeed been met. From today on, he may enter the first division to study the essentials of Zanjutsu, Hakuta, Ho-Ho, and Kaido. The head captain's tone turned stern. However, its formless and faceless second form, the ability to condense enemy clones, is extremely likely to cause chaos and disgraces the dignity of the Serete. Therefore, it is restricted. Unless in necessary moments or with special permission from the head captain, this form of clone must not be used. Understood, Lieutenant Sasakaibe Chijiro, and the captains replied in unison. Many captains breathed a sigh of relief in their hearts. Restriction was good. They didn't want to see a bunch of naked things fighting passionately on the battlefield one day. After this meeting, Yadi's pseudo-Bankai Seishi Hanso, with its shocking ability and extremely embarrassing side effects, left an indelible, complex impression in the hearts of the Godai 13 captains. In the Serete, the legend of the half-year Bankai genius also spread. Because Yadi's Bankai ability was too powerful, the captains unanimously agreed to seal part of its power. Chapter 65 Graduation Assessment. Seoul Society, Serete, Four Noble Families District. The Four Noble Families District was originally called the Five Noble Families District. But ever since the Shiba family, one of the five, was exiled to Rukengai, there have only been four noble families in Serete, and the district was renamed accordingly. Deep within the residence of the Tsuneyashiro family, one of the current four noble families, inside a study guarded by layers of barriers, an old man wearing a luxurious deep purple family head haori sat behind a massive desk. He was the current head of the Tsuneyashiro family, Tsuneyashiro Chinko. Time had carved deep wrinkles onto his face, and a meticulously groomed white beard hung down to his chest. At this moment, Tsuneyashiro Chinko's fingers were slowly brushing over a special scroll spread out before him, upon which obscure and difficult to decipher Rise-He runes flickered. This scroll came from the Great Spiritual Library, the core database of Seoul Society, which could automatically collect and record intelligence from Seoul Society and the human world. As one of the four noble families of Serete, the Tsuneyashiro family had for generations managed the Great Spiritual Library, possessing insight into almost all the history, major events, and forbidden knowledge since the birth of Seoul Society. The content of the scroll concerned the name that had recently caused a massive stir in Serete, Yadi. Shino Academy 999th class freshman, rank 5 spiritual pressure upon enrollment, extraordinary physique, Shikai in 1 month, Bankai in half a year. Tsuneyashiro Chinko said in a hoarse, low voice, fusion of blade and wielder, immortal body, ability to create clones. There was not a shred of appreciation for this Shinigami genius in Tsuneyashiro Chinko's eyes, only a cold scrutiny and an increasingly fervent greed. When Tsuneyashiro Chinko's gaze fell upon the key description in the scroll regarding Yadi's Bankai form, Zanpakuto completely fused with the body, permanently maintaining Bankai state. His narrowed eyes suddenly erupted with a terrifying brilliance, and his fingers trembled slightly from excitement. Fusion of blade and wielder, permanent Bankai. Tsuneyashiro Chinko's breathing became heavy, and he muttered to himself, this should not be a Bankai under the Asachi system established after Seoul Society's founding. This is the awakening of a Zanpakuto where the power of the soul's origin and one's own will directly condense into a weapon. Tsuneyashiro Chinko stood up abruptly, his hunched back seemingly straightening slightly as he paced back and forth in the dim study, filled with irrepressible excitement. Asachi HMPH. Tsuneyashiro Chinko let out a cold snort full of disdain and said dismissively, they are merely standard containers created by those guys in the royal palace to mass-produce Shinigami, forged by mixing the souls of Shinigami and Hollows, forcibly granting souls the possibility of communicating with a Zanpakuto. while also being able to use the Zanpakuto to monitor all Shinigami. Tsuneshiro Chinko's thoughts flew to a more distant era, the age belonging to the ancestors of the 5 noble families. Before Soul Society was born, before the Asachi were created, the power of true powerhouses originated from the soul itself. Where the will points, power gathers. The Zanpakuto is not bestowed by external objects, but is condensed and shaped directly by the power of one's own soul and will, just as the weapon born after a Menno's grand self-rankerizes is an extension of its essential power. This is the true origin form of power. The ancestors of us great noble families were all peerless powerhouses who possessed such aptitude. Tsuneshiro Chinko's gaze became incredibly burning as he stared fixedly at Yati's name on the scroll and said, "And this Yati, the way he awakened, his Bankai form, he absolutely did not rely on an Asachi. He condensed the Zanpakuto himself deep within his soul, and the Asachi was merely the key to unlocking his power." Tsuneshiro Chinko's gaze involuntarily turned to the deepest part of the study, toward a crystal box shrouded in layers of seal barriers. Lying quietly inside the box was a Zanpakuto with an ancient design but no blade, and Rakyot. This was the divine artifact passed down through generations of the Tsuneshiro family. And Rakyot could copy and use the power of any Zanpakuto, but every use incurred a curse. And Rakyot would continuously gnaw on the user's soul origin, causing the user's power to drain and their lifespan to plummet. This was also why past family heads had the divine artifact but never used it. Looking at the eerie light of the divine artifact and thinking of the descriptions of Yati's fusion of blade and wielder and immortality in the scroll, a tempting thought grew wildly in Tsuneshiro Chinko's heart. If I could take the soul of a Shinigami who possesses such aptitude, whose soul can perfectly fuse with a Zanpakuto, and even possesses the immortality characteristic, and use it as materials. Using such a soul, combined with divine artifact forging techniques, to strip, refine, and forge its soul essence into a new divine artifact, an auxiliary divine artifact that can counteract Enrakyot's curse, or a container that can directly bear and control Enrakyot's power. Tsuneshiro Chinko seemed to see a vision of the future of the Tsuneshiro family. Tsuneshiro Chinko holding Enrakyot, using various powerful Zanpakuto abilities without restraint, with no more worries about his soul being devoured. By then, the 2 divine artifacts would allow the Tsuneshiro family to regain the glory of their ancestors, truly standing above all other noble families, with no more hidden worries about the withering of talent in other families. Must act as soon as possible. Tsuneshiro Chinko clenched his fist abruptly and thought, an existence with such aptitude is a once in 10,000 years occurrence. Once he truly grows up and masters the essence of his power, with his uncanny abilities of immortality and clones, trying to capture him again would be nothing but a pipe dream. Tsuneshiro Chinko's gaze fell back to the description of Yati's current status in the scroll, and he pondered a capture plan in his heart. He has only been enrolled for half a year. Although he has achieved Bankai, his combat experience, techniques, and especially his deep application of Zanpakuto power must still be shallow. The immortality he relies on only stays at the surface level of recovering from damage, and it still requires the consumption of spiritual pressure. As long as I use powerful Kaido to instantly imprison and seal him, cutting off his spiritual pressure circulation, making him unable to store and consume it, then that so-called immortality will be nothing but a facade. Tsuneshiro Chinko walked quickly back to the desk, spread out a special order paper, gathered spiritual pressure at his fingertips, and began to write a secret order. After writing, the paper burned without fire, turning into a beam of faint light that instantly pierced through the barrier and disappeared into the void realm. Tsuneshiro Chinko's white beard trembled slightly in the cold light, and he sighed in his heart. Yati, don't blame me. If you must blame someone, blame yourself for possessing aptitude that shouldn't belong to this era. Your soul will become the most perfect cornerstone for my Tsuneshiro family to return to the peak. West Rukengai, under the banner held up by 2 feet that read Shiba Kyukaku, was the Shiba family residence. Shiba Kyukaku was biting on her signature long, thin pipe, sitting nonchalantly on the veranda, her prosthetic right arm resting casually on her bent knee. On the Rise-He communication board in front of her, the latest news about Sarete from secret channels was scrolling by. When Shiba Kyukaku saw the words Yati, Bankai in half a year, Seishi Hanso, permanent Bankai state, immortal clone. Kyukaku choked on a mouthful of smoke, coughing violently, and nearly dropped her pipe. Cough, 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 half a year, able to Bankai, and it's a permanent state. Kyukaku wiped away the tears from coughing, her eyes erupting with an incredulous light, which immediately turned into ecstasy, and she said excitedly, "Ha ha ha, I really didn't misjudge him. That white-haired dog is an incredible monster. Ha ha ha." After laughing for a while, Shiba Kyukaku frowned and said, "Why did he expose the fact that he can fuse with his Zanpakuto? This will attract a lot of trouble. Who will attract trouble? Kyukaku." A female voice with a playful smile came from above without warning. Shiba Kyukaku didn't even look up and replied irritably, "Who else could it be? Of course, it's that Shinigami genius your family picked up." Before the words had even faded, a figure as agile as a black panther hung down from the rafters, her long purple hair cascading down, her golden eyes full of playful amusement. The person who arrived was none other than the former captain of the 2nd Division, commander-in-chief of the Stealth Force, and former head of the Shihoin family who had defected from Sarete, Shihoin Yorwichi. Shihoin Yorwichi, like an agile cat, flipped and landed steadily beside Kyukaku, sat cross-legged, and casually picked up Kyukaku's sake bottle and took a swig. "Yati." Yorwichi licked the sake from the corner of her mouth, a flash of brilliance crossing her golden eyes as she said, "That little guy who enrolled with my family's recommendation letter? What happened to him?" Although Shihoin Yorwichi had defected, the Shihoin family's intelligence network remained efficient, but she had just returned to Seoul society and had not yet received this explosive latest news. Shiba Kyukaku shoved the Rise-He communication board to Yorwichi, shaking her pipe smugly, and said, "See for yourself. Bankai in half a year, permanently maintained. Immortal clone. Tusk, Yorwichi, that recommendation slot of yours really paid off this time." Yorwichi quickly scanned the information, the playful smile on her face gradually fading, replaced by a rare gravity and shock. Fusion of blade and wielder, permanent Bankai. This is no longer in the category of an ordinary genius, Kyukaku. Shihoin Yorwichi put down the communication board, her golden cat eyes narrowing slightly as she said, "This feeling, it's more like the soul's origin directly condensing into a weapon. It's the path of Shinigami from before the Asachi system was created in the royal palace." Kyukaku bit her pipe and said, "It's fine, he's being personally taught by the head captain, ha. Just thinking about the expressions of those old stubborns makes me happy." Shiba Kyukaku slapped Yorwich's shoulder hard and said, "Speaking of which, using your family's connections for that recommendation letter was the right move. Otherwise, just relying on my Shiba family's name, those old fogies in the Central 46 might not have bought it." Yorwichi smiled again with a touch of cunning. It was just a convenient gesture. A genius from the 80th district of Rukengai, who awakened his power on his own, discovered and recommended by my Shihoin family, it's logical and reasonable. I just didn't expect the quality of this genius to far exceed expectations. In Yati's single dormitory, he had just received 2 official notices delivered by Hell Butterflies. The first was a notice from Godai 13 head captain Yamamoto. Order. Shino Academy 999th class student Yati. In view of the fact that his Bankai Seishi Hanso ability formless and faceless second form is prone to causing confusion and damages dignity, it is hereby restricted. Unless permitted by the head captain or in life or death necessary moments, the use of this form's clone is strictly prohibited. Additionally, Yati is permitted to use this order to go to the 1st Division barracks for training from this day forward. Head Captain Yamamoto's seal. Yati looked at the order stamped with Head Captain Yamamoto's spiritual pressure seal, and a trace of obvious depression and helplessness flashed in his eyes. Sai restricted, as expected, I was restricted. That special clone was a stroke of genius I thought of after racking my brains and a flash of inspiration. This is a god-tier skill that ignores combat power gaps, ignores spiritual pressure rank, and ignores status. And it turns out it damages the dignity of Sarete. For the first time, Yadi felt a deep generation gap with this Shinigami world, which was strictly hierarchical and full of rules. Depression aside, the head captain's order could not be disobeyed. Yadi put away the order, and his gaze fell on the second notice. This ruling document from the Central 46, however, made his calm eyes narrow slightly. Central 46 ruling. Regarding Shino Academy, student Yadi's application for graduation without examination. After deliberation by the Central 46, the application is rejected. Reason: the student has been enrolled for less than 1 year, and his qualifications are too shallow. The Shino Academy was established with the aim of systematically cultivating the virtue, wisdom, physique, and ability of Shinigami. Although fast-tracking shows talent, the foundation is not yet stable, and heart nature is not yet mature. It is feared that he cannot shoulder the heavy responsibilities of a Shinigami. Final ruling: the student must complete the standard graduation assessment to prove that his determination, ability, and sense of responsibility have reached the Shinigami standard. Assessment content: proceed to the designated area, Zudeo Rift, clear out the large number of hollows entrenched there, and investigate and purge the culprit, a suspected defecting Shinigami who has been creating chaos in the area recently. Note: if the assessment is passed, the joining test can be waived, and he is permitted to join the Godai 13 directly. Central 46 seal. Zudeo Rift, large number of hollows, and a suspected defecting Shinigami. Yadi silently read these keywords, unconsciously brushing over the cold text on the notice. The rejection of the application for exemption from the examination was within his expectations. The Central 46's thick bureaucratic style would inevitably distrust a non-humanoid fast-track genius like him. But this assessment content was indeed a bit strange. Clearing out a large group of hollows and a defecting Shinigami sounds like a field mission for elite Shinigami, not a graduation assessment for a student with too shallow qualifications. This difficulty has been deliberately raised. Is it purely making things difficult, or? An alarm bell rang slightly in Yadi's heart. The assessment location was chosen at the Zudeo Rift outside Rukengai, and the targets were a large number of hollows and a suspected defecting Shinigami. No matter how you look at it, it seems like a carefully laid trap. Yadi put away the notice, looked at the towering white buildings of Sarete outside the window, and thought of the warning from the Shiba family in West Rukengai. Do not easily expose the fact that you confuse with your Zanpakuto. Thinking about it this way, it seems that either the trouble is brought by the special Bankai, where the Zanpakuto and Shinigami fuse, or it's the difficulty brought on by my special soul. It's a good opportunity to test the effect of the clone, combined with those forbidden-level Kaido, on a real battlefield. Yadi already had a plan in his mind. Since someone wanted to test him, he would let them see just how powerful this too shallowly qualified genius was. Meanwhile, at the Shiba residence, the secret intelligence channel brought by Shihoin Yorwichi had just placed this special graduation assessment content from the Central 46 in front of Kyukaku and her. The two looked at the location, Zudeo Rift, and their brows furrowed simultaneously. This is not a good place. Chapter 66 Unexpected, Soul Society. Outside Rukengai, Zudeo Rift. This is a desolate area on the outskirts of Rukengai, where wind swirls with sand and withered grass on the cracked, reddish-brown earth. The Zudeo Rift looks like an abyss torn open violently, with jagged edges. Chaotic spiritual pressure turbulence, resembling tangible ink, rolls and overflows along the rift's edge. This is one of the closest areas to the border between Soul Society and Hukomundo. At the edge of the rift, 3 Shinigami wearing the Haori of Shino Academy examiners stand solemnly, watching the solitary figure deep below with grave expressions. Koga Sasuke, the leader, has a face as rigid as a stone carving, thick eyebrows knit together, and sharp eyes in deep-set sockets. Seonji Rin, beside Koga Sasuk, is tall and thin. Her gaze behind gold-rimmed glasses is calm and focused, her hands tucked into her sleeves, with faint light flickering occasionally. Finally, there is Kurosawa Tetsuo, whose physique is as burly as an iron tower. His bronze-colored face is marked with several old scars, and his right hand is constantly pressed against the hilt of his Zanpakuto. The examiner's only target for supervision is Yati. It has begun. Seonji Rin's voice is devoid of waves. Her fingertips brush lightly against an instrument in her sleeve, and a faint flicker of spiritual pressure light vanishes instantly. Below, Yati's figure has completely submerged into the churning fog on the periphery of the rift, which contains a heavy aura of Jillian-class Mennos. Almost the moment Yati steps in, the group of Mennos inside seems to sense something. The shrieks from deep within the rift, which make the soul tremble, suddenly rise in pitch, and waves upon waves of black shadows swarm toward Yati. The gray fog is torn apart by violent force. Countless distorted Jillian-class Mennos, as if driven by an invisible whip, lock their scarlet eyes onto the intruder Yati, and the black shadows of the Mennos surge forward like a tide. Even more alarming, the dark space deep within the rift is like a shattered eggshell, with new, massive Jillian-class Mennos shadows constantly squeezing out, endless and inexhaustible. Facing this terrifying tide of Mennos that would cause an ordinary seated officer to instantly collapse, Yati simply raises his hand calmly. Hado 31, Shekaho modified. Yati's clear chanting voice rings out distinctly amidst the shrieks of the hollows. However, what answers this low-level Hado name is a torrent of destructive light cones. Blinding white light erupts suddenly, instantly overpowering the darkness of the rift. Countless huge light cones, formed purely from destructive spiritual pressure, manifest out of thin air. Accompanied by a screech that tears through space, they crash into the swarming Mennos like a rainstorm. Booms, booms, boom. Deafening explosions merge into one, and the destructive white light swallows everything in the field of vision. The hard white bone masks of the Gillians shatter like fragile pottery, and their massive bodies are twisted and vaporized in the white light. The shockwave of the spiritual pressure explosion causes even the ground around the entire Zudeo rift to tremble violently, with gravel rolling down. What? At the edge of the rift, the rigid face of examiner Koga Sasuk shows violent fluctuation for the first time. His eyes widen suddenly, as if they are about to pop out of their sockets. Koga Sasuk stares fixedly at the destructive storm of white light below and says in a dry, incredulous hiss, "What Hado 33? This is clearly Hado 91 Senjukoten Teho. Spiritual pressure peak exceeds measurement limit." Seonji Rin's hand, tucked in her sleeve, trembles violently, and the sound of the instrument inside shattering from overload comes from her sleeve. Seonji Rin's pupils behind her gold-rimmed glasses contract sharply, and she thinks in shock, no wonder there are rumors that Yati will become the next great Kaido chief. This isn't just discarding the chant. This can even be called a forbidden Kaido with a reckless chant. Veins bulge on the back of Kurosawa Tetsuo's hand, pressed against the sword hilt, his knuckles turning white. His burly body leans forward subconsciously, and he says in a low voice, "The targets locked onto are all the vital points of this group of Mennos. It is terrifyingly precise. This kid is worthy of being the captain's disciple." The three experienced examiners are left with nothing but cognitive-shattering shock as they watch Yati's attack. Hado 91 is a terrifying forbidden art that even captain-level Shinigami need to chant carefully. And Yati not only used it, but used a low-level chant as a disguise, clearing the field instantly. But the tide of Mennos on the battlefield does not cease because of this earth-shattering blow. Deep in the rift, more and larger shadows continue to squirm, roaring as they fill the void and surge forward again, like an eternal abyss that can never be filled. Yati's gaze has no waves. He raises his hands again, and spiritual pressure light flows at his fingertips. Hado 58 Tenrin. Hado 54 Heian. Whoosh boom. A violent hurricane rises from the ground. instantly whipping up the burning hollow remains and the flames that have not yet been extinguished. The wind aids the fire, and the fire borrows the power of the wind. A tornado of fire, reaching from heaven to earth and carrying countless sharp bone fragments and scorching white flames, roars into shape. The fire tornado, like an enraged flame dragon, twists its massive body crazily. Wherever it passes, whether it is newly surged ordinary hollows or more powerful Gillians, all are swept into it. The hard bone armor of the Menos makes a harsh friction sound in the high-speed rotating hurricane, and then disintegrates and melts. Combined Kaido, instantaneous. Seonji Rin's voice carries a tremor she herself did not notice, and the look behind her lenses is nothing but horror. Before the shock at the edge of the rift subsides, two figures peek out from the shadows of rocks outside the battlefield, which have been distorted by secret arts. Shiba Kyukaku leans lazily against a protruding, massive reddish-brown rock. Her black hair is wrapped in cloth, and she is wearing a white cloak. Shiba Kyukaku's eyes look through the smoke, locking firmly onto the figure who is stirring up a destructive storm in the hollow tide. The corner of her mouth, holding a pipe, hooks into an undisguised appreciation as she says, "Haha, this kid. Not only does he have powerful talent with his Zanpakuto, but his play with Kaido is like he learned it from the Hayakayan clan." Beside Shiba Kyukaku, a curvy, honey-colored figure is almost integrated with the shadow of the rock. It is the former 2nd Division captain, Shihoin Yorwichi. Shihoin Yorwich's golden pupils also widen slightly at this moment, staring tightly at every attacking move of Yati, especially the terrifying spiritual pressure control ability when he instantly casts high-level Hado. She says in surprise, the Hayakayan clan isn't even as outrageous as Yati. Kyukaku, this kind of control, this kind of instantaneous judgment. He is simply a monster born for Kaido. Just as Yorwichi finishes speaking, a cold and sharp spiritual pressure erupts from a very close distance behind them without warning. "Lady Yorwichi, Yati really is your person." The cold reprimand is like a blade splitting the air. The bodies of Shihoin Yorwichi and Shiba Kyukaku stiffen at the same time, and they turn their heads sharply. The third party who attacked is the current 2nd Division captain, Captain Soifan. Captain Soifan's petite body is wrapped in a form-fitting shihakusho, but at this moment, she is like an unsheathed sharp blade, nailed firmly a few steps behind them. Captain Soifan stares fixedly at Yorwichi, her eyes containing long-suppressed anger, grievance, and deeper pain. Captain Soifan's small fists are clenched tight, her knuckles turning white from excessive force, and her body is trembling slightly, as if she is about to pounce in the next second. "Why?" Captain Soifan's voice rises, almost roaring. "When you left back then, why didn't you take me with you? You just like this, abandoned the 2nd Division, abandoned me." The last two words are squeezed out from between her teeth, with a tremor like a sob. The usual playful expression on Yorwich's face solidifies instantly. Looking at the girl in front of her, whom she brought up almost single-handedly, but who is now trembling and questioning like an injured young beast. Yorwichi subconsciously reaches out, as if wanting to ruffle that stubborn short hair like she has countless times in the past, but the movement freezes halfway. "Soifan," Yorwich's deep voice says, "some things are not as you think." "Not as what, not as what?" Captain Soifan takes a sharp step forward, staring at Yorwichi and saying, "You are always like this, saying nothing. Do you treat me like a child who understands nothing?" Kyukaku stands silently on the side, the pipe between her fingers extinguished at some point. She looks at the complex expression on Yorwich's face that she has never seen before, and then looks at the grievance and sadness in Captain Soifan's eyes and sighs in her heart. What a sinful woman. Subsequently, Shiba Kyukaku no longer cares about the two, and once again casts her gaze toward the chaotic Menos battlefield. In the Zudao Rift, Yati's Kaido storm is still raging. The fire tornado, like a greedy giant beast, swallows batch after batch of hollows that throw themselves at it regardless of death. However, the hollows pouring out from deep in the rift seem endless, and the massive quantity begins to offset the destructive efficiency of the Kaido. Yati's brows furrow slightly, imperceptibly, and the spiritual light at his fingertips changes again, lighting up with that deep blue glow once more. Hado 31 Shekaho. This time it is a genuine red fireball, just in greater numbers. The red fireballs crash like a downpour toward the fresh forces surging from behind the hollow tide. The explosions are continuous, and the roar of spiritual pressure echoes in the abyss. At the bottom of the rift, a group of masked men wearing clothes that can isolate spiritual pressure fluctuations watch quietly as Yati blasts those menos into slag. The leader is called Yuzuki-jiya. He was found by a certain noble from Rukengai when he was a child and trained as a death soldier. Now is the time for him to repay the favor of his master's family. Yuzuki-jiya raises his hands, giving the signal to prepare to move, and thinks to himself, "For the honor of the master's family, I can only make you suffer a little." The three examiners at the edge of the rift have slightly relaxed expressions, but they remain grave. Kurosawa Tetsuo says in a low voice, the Hado numbers are constantly decreasing. Yati is saving spiritual pressure, but the number of hollows. Koga Sasuke just wants to nod, but his gaze suddenly freezes, staring fixedly deep into the chaotic area below, which is mixed with the remains of hollows and chaotic spiritual pressure. Koga Sasuke then says in shock, "Not right. There is something else down there, it's not a hollow." Almost at the same time, he speaks out. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. Dozens of spiritual pressure beams of various colors, yet all emitting powerful binding force, shoot out from the chaotic shadows at the bottom of the rift without warning, aiming directly at Yati in the center of the battlefield. The angle from which these beams appear is extremely tricky, and the timing is precisely stuck at the subtle moment when Yati has just finished releasing a wave of Kaido, and his old force is spent, while new force has not yet arisen. The beams themselves are not simple Bakudo. They are wrapped in ominous black incantations, and their speed is so fast that only streaks of afterimages are left. Even more alarming is that at the same time the beams are fired, a group of figures suddenly stand up in the shadows below. They are completely wrapped in airtight pitch-black close-fitting clothes, wearing pitch-black masks that reveal only their eyes, and their movements are as uniform as if they have been trained. The leader has a tall and straight figure, and his aura is the most refined. They hold high, huge shields flashing with dull, dark light in their hands. The surface of the shields is not metal, but embedded with large pieces of strange ore, shakyoseki. Shakyoseki is an ore that can suppress spiritual power, and the walls of the entire Serite are made of shakyoseki. Boom, booms, boom. Yati's reaction is not slow. Almost the instant the beams appear, several deep blue shakaho balls have already bombarded the incoming Bakudo beams and the shield-holding men in black. But those shakaho that could blast apart Gillians, upon hitting those shields embedded with shakyoseki, are like mud oxen entering the sea, having no effect at all. The violent explosions only stir up circles of pitch-black light ripples on the surface of the shields, and are then decomposed and cancelled out silently by the defense on the surface of the shields. And taking advantage of this gap, the dozens of Bakudo beams wrapped in incantations have already arrived. Poof, poof, poofs. The spiritual beams fired at Yati are not direct attacks, but coil and bind like living things. Instantly, Yati's limbs, torso, and even his neck are locked tightly by several spiritual ropes, emitting powerful binding power. The incantations on the spiritual beams squirm and erode crazily on the spiritual pressure on Yati's body, like living maggots attempting to drill into Yati. Hey! Yati lets out a muffled groan. His body stumbles from the powerful binding force and the spiritual pressure circulating around his body, like a fire doused with cold water, dims visibly. Who is it? Koga Sasuke roars, his hand already on the hilt of his Zanpakuto. Kurosawa Tetsuo is even more furious, his burly body's spiritual pressure erupting, and he is about to leap into the rift. 3 examiners, no need to go over. A calm voice sounds abruptly beside the 3 of them. The 3 examiners are terrified and shocked, turning their heads sharply, only to see a figure standing quietly a few steps behind them at some point. The same Shihakasho, the same face. It is none other than another Yati. So that's it, it's a clone. Seeing another Yati appear, the tension in the three examiners' hearts relaxes slightly, and they turn to continue watching the developments on the battlefield. The Yati bound below looks at the masked man leading at the bottom of the rift and says in a deep voice, "You are traitorous Shinigami." At the bottom of the rift, the leading man in black, Yuzuki Jia, has no waves in his eyes. Facing Yati's questioning, with no intention of answering at all, Yuzuki Jia raises his hand again. The masked men behind him respond immediately, forming seals with their hands and chanting more complex incantations in their mouths rapidly. The Bakudo spiritual ropes wrapped around Yati shine brightly, and the black incantations squirming on them erode inward even more crazily. More beams shoot from the shadows below toward Yati like poisonous snakes, instantly wrapping Yati into a cocoon of incantations emitting pitch-black light. End of Chapter 67, Soul Society, Zudeo Rift. On the battlefield, the bound Yati seem to have given up on speaking, no longer struggling or asking questions. However, at the very moment the light of the seal was about to reach its peak, the body of the Yati, bound by layers of restraints on the battlefield, began to dissipate without warning, like sand scattered by the wind. The look in Yuzuki Jia's eyes beneath his mask remained calm. Evidently, he had long been aware of Yati's clone ability. Binding Bakudo 58, Kakashitsu Jaku. Yuzuki Jia cast the tracking Bakudo without hesitation. Rise-He fluctuations centered on him erupted outward, and the threads composed of Rise-He vibrated rapidly, capturing every trace remaining in the space. Almost at the exact moment, the tracking spirit net unfurled. Hum. 7 identical Yati figures flashed onto the battlefield in an instant. Without words, without testing, the 7 Yatis moved in perfect unison, raising their hands simultaneously, the spiritual pressure at their fingertips instantly condensing to a heart-stopping degree. Hado 63, Reikoho. Hado 88, Huryu Gekizoku Shinten Reiho. Hado 91, Senjukoten Teiho. Violent thunder and scorching, white cones of light erupted simultaneously, aimed directly at the masked Shinigami below. Defend! Yuzuki Jia barked a sharp command, and the surrounding masked men reacted with commendable speed, instantly turning their massive Shakoseki shields toward Yati, attempting to block these high-level Hado. However, a new anomaly arose. Clang! A metallic vibration echoed from the deepest part of the chaotic shadows at the bottom of the rift. Immediately following, a blade light of indescribable sharpness suddenly flared up. The blade light did not slash toward Yati, but instead expanded violently. SSHH. Countless blades, as fine as ox hair and nearly transparent, appeared out of thin air. Their numbers were so vast, like a suddenly whipped-up silver sandstorm, that they instantly filled all the space within the rift. These tiny blades ignored friend or foe, spinning frantically and cutting through everything. The sound of blades piercing flesh was as dense as a rainstorm hitting banana leaves. Countless fine sprays of blood instantly burst from the 7 Yati clones. Their black shihakusho were easily torn, and their skin was cut, causing wounds that bled profusely. The Hado unleashed by the Yatis had its power greatly diminished by this sudden storm of blades, but the black-clad figures holding shields below were not spared either. The Shakyoseki shields could not fully insulate against this omnipresent, ultra-high-frequency blade cutting. The fine blades penetrated the gaps in the shields, burrowing in like maggots on bones, instantly leaving countless fine bloody marks on the black-clad figures. For a moment, the screams of the black-clad figures and the shrill whistle of the blades intertwined on the battlefield. Urg! The 7 Yati clones grunted in unison. Their movements inevitably faltered, and their bodies were drenched in blood from their wounds. In this flash of lightning, Yuzuki Jia's gaze swept over the 7 heavily injured clones. 6 of the clones had blood gushing from their wounds, continuously being sliced by those fine Rise-He blades with no sign of healing. Their forms were even unstable, showing signs of dissipating. Only one. That clone which had released the forbidden Hado. The cuts on its arm were writhing and sealing up at a speed visible to the naked eye under the faint glimmer of Raisi. The real body has appeared. A terrifying brilliance erupted in Yuzuki-Jia's eyes, and he roared, "The real body has appeared. Target locked. Activate the seal." Following Yuzuki-Jia's command, in the shadows below, those black-clad figures who had not been completely affected by the blade storm slammed the strange talismans they had prepared long ago into the ground beneath their feet. Boom! A dark purple pillar of light that blotted out the sky, centered on Yuzuki-Jia and the real Yati he had locked onto, erupted through the surface and pierced straight into the sky above the Zudao rift. Immediately following, countless dark purple pillars of light of the same color, inscribed with complex and ancient runes, rose from the reddish-brown earth along the edge of the rift, layer upon layer, like the bars of a cage. They intertwined and connected, instantly weaving into a massive, three-dimensional barrier network in the sky that covered the entire Zudao rift. A massive spiritual pressure descended with a roar. The barrier walls flowed with dark, viscous runes, each one exuding a power of prohibition and attrition purely targeted at spiritual bodies. The air instantly became like solidified mercury. The immense pressure caused the remaining hollows below to let out painful wails, their bodies forced to dissipate as their Raisi was absorbed by the barrier. The 7 Yati clones looked up simultaneously, their expressions grave. Without a moment's hesitation, the 7 figures instantly scattered, occupying different positions within the barrier. The spiritual pressure light condensing at their fingertips instantly became blindingly bright, and the violent energy fluctuations caused the entire ceiling barrier to begin trembling violently. Hado 91, Senjukoten Teho. 7 torrents of terrifying spiritual pressure, capable of destroying heaven and earth, roared toward the dark purple barrier walls in all directions. Yuzuki-Jia watched this scene indifferently, making no move, thinking to himself it's useless. The soul-devouring barrier cannot be broken by Kaido. Just at the moment the 7 destructive torrents of Raisi were about to collide with the barrier walls, whoosh, 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 whoosh. At 7 locations on the surface of the barrier, a massive gateway appeared at each, emitting a terrifying suction force that devoured everything. Booms, booms, boom, boom. The 7 Hado attacks, capable of leveling mountains, were like clay oxen entering the sea, slamming fiercely into those 7 dark gates. There was no earth-shattering explosion, no shockwave from energy clashing. There was only a dull sound, like a heavy object falling into water. The dark gates were like a greedy, massive stomach, instantly swallowing the 7 attacks without even a ripple, before rotating and closing to vanish. The massive barrier remained intact, the dark purple runes still slowly flowing on the walls, exuding the power to bind Raisi. Suddenly, the massive barrier, like the cavity of a living creature, began to slowly contract inward. Space was squeezed, Raisi was extracted, and an atmosphere of despair permeated every corner. The 7 Yati clones stood within the shrinking cage, looking at the place where the dark gates that had devoured all their attacks had vanished, watching the barrier walls that were shrinking with unwavering determination. The real Yati, locked onto by Yuzuki-Jia, slowly turned its gaze, scanning these masked Shinigami, and finally, Yati's gaze settled on Yuzuki-Jia below. Yati realized that these people were all suicide squads, focused entirely on mutual destruction with him. He sighed and said, "You have prepared, quite thoroughly indeed." The moment the words fell, a continuous sequence of soft sounds, like soap bubbles bursting. The 7 Yati clones, including the one identified as the real body, had their bodies, like punctured phantoms, simultaneously transform into specks of drifting Raisi light dust, completely vanishing within the shrinking ceiling barrier. Inside the barrier, only the violent hollows and the black-clad figures waiting in battle formation below remained. What? Yuzuki-Jia's pupils suddenly shrank to pinpricks. Even his pitch-black mask could not hide the shock in his eyes. Yuzuki-Jia stared fixedly at the place where the 7 Yatis had simultaneously dissipated, thinking the real body also disappeared. No, from the very beginning, could it be that there was never a real body here at all? Everything, including that detail about the healing wounds, was it all just bait? Yuzuki Jia pulled a communication tool, which looked like it was made from some kind of frog skin, from his robes. He channeled spiritual pressure into his fingertips and carved a specific code onto it. No real body. In the shadows of the rocks, outside the side of the battlefield, at the edge of the Zudeo Rift, Shiba Kyukaku, Shihoin Yorwichi, and Captain Soifan poked their heads out, watching the massive barrier gradually contract. Shiba Kyukaku turned to the figure beside her and asked Yadi, "When did you get here?" "I had already arrived here, before you even came." The person responding was yet another clone of Yadi. When the masked Shinigami appeared on the battlefield, Yadi had revealed himself to stop Shiba Kyukaku and the other two from going to help. Captain Soifan's attention was also drawn away from the battlefield. Her almond-shaped eyes widened, and embarrassment and shock instantly overwhelmed her sorrow. Even she, as the commander-in-chief of the stealth force, had been unable to detect where Yadi was hiding. The complex emotions in Shihoin Yorwich's eyes were also interrupted, and she asked curiously, from the very beginning, "You heard it all?" Yadi shrugged and said with a smile, "Can't be helped. There are unexpectedly many spectators tonight. I couldn't let you all get caught up in my business." On another high slope with a good view, Captain Unohana Ritsu of the 4th Division stood quietly, her gentle gaze watching everything on the battlefield. When the masked men appeared and launched their attack, a light breeze brushed past her, and a Yadi clone quietly manifested beside her. Captain Unohana Ritsu, the Yadi clone bowed slightly. Captain Unohana Ritsu was not surprised. She turned to look at the clone and offered a gentle smile, a brilliant use of Kaido, especially the clone's proficiency with Hado. "You must also be very proficient in Kaido. Yadi, would you be willing to join the 4th Division after graduation?" The Yadi clone smiled politely. "Thank you for your kindness, Captain. Please allow me to consider it." Behind a pile of rubble not far from the battlefield, Captain Kamamura Sajin of the 7th Division stood like a rock. When the ceiling jutsu barrier rose, a Yadi clone also appeared beside him. "Captain Kamamura," the Yadi clone spoke. Captain Kamamura's deep voice resonated in Yadi's ears. "Yadi, your clone technique is numerous and possesses impressive strength. It would be highly efficient for guard duties at the Central 46 and critical areas of the Serete. The 7th Division needs talent like you." The Yadi clone shook his head and said, "I apologize, Captain Kamamura, but guard duty is not what I desire." And on a cliff top with the best view, Captain Kaioraku Shunsui of the 8th Division tipped his hat, while Captain Yukitake of the 13th Division stood beside him, coughing lightly. The purple light of the ceiling jutsu barrier illuminated their faces. "Oh my, what a big scene, Captain Yukitake," Captain Kaioraku Shunsui remarked. Those people's goal is clear. They want to capture Yadi, and it doesn't matter if he lives or dies," Captain Yukitake said, his brows furrowed. At this moment, a Yadi clone also appeared near them, and both captains looked over at the same time. "Yadi," Captain Yukitake spoke gently, his tone sincere, "your talent is astonishing. The position of lieutenant in the 13th Division is currently vacant. If you are willing, you can come directly to the 13th Division to serve as lieutenant." Captain Kaioraku Shunsui immediately shouted exaggeratedly, Hey, Captain Yukitake, that's too cunning. Are you offering such terms just because you don't have a lieutenant?" "Young Yadi, don't listen to him. Come to our 8th Division. The work is relaxed and pleasant, and there's fine wine to treat you with." Captain Kaioraku Shunsui winked mischievously at the Yadi clone. At this moment, Captain Kaioraku Shunsui's gaze inadvertently swept over the Shihakusho on the Yadi clone, and he associated it with the clones on the battlefield earlier that were also wearing clothes. A thought flashed through his mind. So that's it. The naked clone wasn't a limitation of his Zanpakuto ability, but just this kid's own bad taste. No wonder old man Yama specifically added that rule back then. It seems the captain commander had already discovered it from that time. What deep foresight. Thinking of this, Captain Kaioraku Shunsui's expression couldn't help but become a bit strange. and a playful smile curled at the corners of his mouth. The Yati clone keenly captured Captain Kaioraku Shunsui's strange gaze and smile, and also associated it with his own naked clone operation, as well as the fact that he had made all the clones wear clothes to confuse the enemy. A terrifying thought appeared in Yati's mind. I was careless. I didn't expect so many captains to be watching. I won't be considered a pervert, right? The battle dust settled. After the Yati clone in the Zudale Rift dissipated, the sealing jutsu barrier and the entire rift were teleported away, and the captains also left one after another. Captain Unohana Ritsu and Captain Kamamura nodded to the Yati clone before using Shunpo to leave. Captain Kaioraku Shunsui patted the Yati clone's shoulder, left a meaningful smile, and disappeared with Captain Yukitake. Shiba Kyukaku hoisted her empty sake jug and shouted to the Yati clone and Captain Soifan, who was still talking to Shihoin Yorwichi. Hey, I'm leaving first. Shiba Kyukaku also left using Shunpo. Shihoin Yorwichi took one last look at Captain Soifan, and her figure turned into a black light and disappeared. Captain Soifan clenched her fists on the spot and stood for a long while before unwillingly using Shunpo to leave. At the 12th Division's Department of Research and Development, Mayuri Kuretsuchi excitedly watched the playback screen through the huge Rise-He monitoring screen, especially the clips where the Yati clone quickly recovered after being injured and did not dissipate even after sustaining attacks. Oh ho ho ho, interesting. Too interesting. The clone not only possesses spiritual pressure and combat power equal to the original body, but also does not dissipate immediately when damaged, and even shows a recovery ability similar to immortality. This is by no means a simple clone projection. What excellent material! Analyzing his Rise-He composition and the clone mechanism will surely lead to major discoveries. And in an unknown, high-tech laboratory, Aizen Sasuke sat upright in front of the screen, his lenses reflecting the playback video of the battle at the Zudale Rift. Ikemaru Jin stood to the side with a fox-like smile on his face, while Tausen Kanem stood silently beside him. Clone, both the quantity and quality far exceed expectations. Aizen's voice was calm and waveless, but a faint arc curled at the corners of his mouth as he said, "Every one of Yati's clones possesses lieutenant-level spiritual pressure and full combat capabilities. This is interesting, very interesting. His original body's spiritual pressure rank is likely far beyond the 5th rank. What is limiting him? Or is it some kind of disguise?" Is Captain Aizen interested in him? Ikemaru Jin asked with a smile. His existence itself is a puzzle worth exploring. Aizen smiled slightly and said, "However, the power of Kyoka Suijutsu faces a risk of being unable to fully hypnotize clones that might dissipate and recondense at any moment. Before fully understanding the nature of his abilities, keeping a distance is a wise choice." In the deep residence of the Tsuneyoshiro family, the head, Tsuneyoshiro Chinkyo, looked at the code appearing on the strange bone communicator in his hand, his eyes cold. "No original body. It seems it was a failure." Tsuneyoshiro Chinkyo whispered, "This means the clone possesses all the abilities of the original body, making it impossible to identify the real one. Heh, as expected of a Shinigami who possesses the same aptitude as our ancestors, truly troublesome." A flash of harshness crossed Tsuneyoshiro Chinkyo's eyes as he said, "However, the strength Yuzuki Jia and the others displayed was enough to suppress his clones, which means the plan itself was not flawed. It's just that the target is too cunning. Never mind. The low-level personnel involved in this plan and all links that might have left traces. Have they all been cleaned up?" A low, respectful response came from the shadows. "Yes, my lord, they have all been purged." "Very good." Tsuneyoshiro Chinkyo looked at the courtyard outside the window and thought, "Next, I should think about how to appease that old guy Yamamoto Genryusai Shichikuni and also the Hayakian clan." At the edge of the Zudale Rift, another Yati wearing a shihakusho quietly appeared. He silently watched the huge void left at the rift due to the sealing jutsu. The massive sealed object, along with that group of men in black and the unlucky Menos Grands, had long been teleported to an unknown place. Yadi carefully sensed the residual spiritual pressure fragments and the aura of the barrier runes, his brows slightly furrowed. During his time studying in the Soul Society, Yadi had mainly focused on combat techniques and Kaido training. He truly lacked knowledge of common sense, such as Soul Society noble crests and Stealth Force insignia, failing to find any directional characteristics at the scene. Equipment that isolates spiritual pressure, a Shakyoseki shield, a large-scale sealing jutsu barrier, and finally that Zanpakuto that released a blade storm. The organization is tight and well-prepared. Yadi whispered to himself, although there is no evidence, but to be able to mobilize this kind of power and to have such malice towards me. A name appeared in Yadi's mind, Tsuneyoshiro Takanada. This was a member of a branch family of the Tsuneyoshiro family, known in the original work for his conspiracies and twisted nature. Regardless of whether it's you or not, I'll mark this debt against the Tsuneyoshiro family first. Chapter 68 Part-Time Job, Soul Society, Serete. The Deliberation Hall of Central 46. The solemn and heavy air felt like solidified lead. 46 sages sat in a circle, their large white robes concealing all emotions, with only a few murmurs echoing in the hall. Yadi, a student of the 999th class of the Shino Academy, has passed the Shino Academy graduation examination and has been rated as exceptional. A sage responsible for the report spoke in a flat, waveless voice. This news did not cause much of a stir. It was expected that the monster student, who had already displayed captain-level spiritual pressure and Kaido proficiency, would complete the graduation examination. However, the Zudeo Rift, along with all the hollows within it, and the defecting Soul Reapers who launched the attack, has been completely annihilated. The entire rift has been permanently destroyed by a sealing jutsu and can no longer be used as a hollow breeding ground. The reporter's next words instantly ignited numerous discussions in the meeting room. What? The Zudeo Rift destroyed. Outrageous. That is a precious resource belonging to all Soul Reapers. What about the Menno's Grand Herd inside? Those are indispensable materials for maintaining barriers, repairing Zanpakuto, and even certain rituals. Suppressed exclamations and angry low roars rose one after another. Beneath the white robes of the sages, many leaned forward slightly, their eyes filled with disbelief. The value of the Zudeo Rift was far beyond a simple entrance to Huko Mundo. It was one of the important assets for the stable operation of the Serete. Which family is so audacious to dare take everyone's wealth to eliminate political rivals? A sage belonging to a lower-ranking noble family couldn't help but slam the table and stand up, his voice trembling with anger. But strangely, no other nobles echoed him. The hall instantly fell into an eerie silence. Anger still burned in the hearts of the sages, but there was more of a helpless, stifled feeling. There were only a few forces capable of controlling and modifying the spirit-eating barrier on the periphery of the Zudeo Rift without anyone noticing, allowing it to unleash a sealing jutsu of that scale, and even cleaning up the tail afterward. Do we really want to investigate? What if we find something? This question forced all the calculating noble sages present to weigh the pros and cons repeatedly. Investigate, of course we must investigate. A representative sage finally spoke, his voice carrying a mysterious majesty. Order the Stealth Force and the Research and Development Department to coordinate an investigation into the source of the defecting Soul Reapers and the mastermind behind them. We must provide an explanation to the Serete. However, the topic quickly turned to more practical issues. How to appease Yadi, who had been put in danger because of Central 46's examination. After all, the forces involved with Yadi were also extremely vast. After several days of interest, exchange, and silent compromise, a resolution was quickly reached. In view of the outstanding strength Yadi displayed during the graduation examination, successfully thwarting the conspiracy of the defecting Soul Reapers and maintaining the order of the Soul Society, he is specially granted the qualification of Exceptional Graduate of the Shino Academy, effective immediately. Appoint Yadi Hayakian as the lieutenant of the 13th Division of the Godai 13. At the same time, in view of his exquisite Kaido proficiency, He is specially appointed as the Deputy Grand Kaido Chief of the Kaido Corps. Grant him special permission to maintain Bankai within the Serete to deal with emergencies. Additionally, bestow upon him several Raizhi instruments, several secret potions, and a copy of advanced Kaido research notes. The final resolution was passed, but the sages had different thoughts. Some were brooding over the loss of a hollow breeding ground. Some breathed a sigh of relief that a potential storm had been temporarily quelled, and others cast more gazes at the young man who had received so many privileges and honors. Unlike the majestic 1st Division or the high-tech 12th Division, the 13th Division barracks carried a unique, gentle atmosphere. In the courtyard, the ancient wisteria trellis was covered in new green, and in a few days, it would hang down with dreamy purple flower spikes. Inside the barracks, the soul reapers coming and going walked hurriedly, but did not seem nervous, and the air was filled with a faint fragrance of herbs. The 13th Division was the purification division responsible for purifying hollows in the human world and ferrying souls. It had the largest number of members, but most were sent to the human world to be stationed there. Since the unfortunate sacrifice of the former lieutenant, Shiba Kayan, who was deeply loved by the members, the duties of the lieutenant had been jointly acted upon by the 2/3 seats, Kotsukion and Katsubaki Sentaro. Kotsukion was petite and capable, her eyes always carrying a trace of worry about Captain Yukate's health. Sentaro was sturdy and straightforward, with a spirit of refusing to admit defeat always between his brows. At this moment, in the largest Japanese-style room of the 13th Division barracks, a simple welcome ceremony was underway. Captain Yukatake sat in the main seat, his face still pale with illness, but his smile was gentle and sincere. Kion and Sentaro sat on both sides, with some seated officers and members who had heard the news behind them. Cough, cough. Yukatake coughed twice, smiled, and looked at the door, saying, "Let us welcome the new lieutenant of the 13th Division, Yadi." The door of the room was pulled open, and Yadi, dressed in a brand new lieutenant uniform, walked in. Yadi had a calm smile on his face and bowed slightly to Yukatake and everyone. Yadi reports for duty. I look forward to the captain's and everyone's guidance. Applause rang out in the room. The members curiously sized up this new lieutenant who had become famous in the examination, their eyes filled with awe, curiosity, and a trace of scrutiny. Lieutenant Yadi. Yukatake welcomed him with an appreciative tone. Everyone has heard of Yadi's strength. To be able to retreat unscathed from such a targeted ambush and, properly handle the aftermath is truly remarkable. After Kayan, the 13th Division has always lacked a lieutenant who can truly stand on his own. Your joining is the honor of the 13th Division and also makes the burden on my shoulders much lighter. Captain, you flatter me. Yadi said humbly, "It is my honor to serve the 13th Division. I am a newcomer, and I still need to ask for much advice from the captain, 3rd Seat Kotsu, 3rd Seat Katsubaki, and all the seniors regarding team affairs." Yadi's gaze swept over Kotsu Kion and Katsubaki Sentaro. Kion stood up immediately and said seriously, "Lieutenant, you are too polite. I am Kotsu Kion. Please teach me. If there is anything that needs assistance, please feel free to order me at any time." Katsubaki Sentaro also stood up with a larger movement. He looked straight at Yadi and said in a loud voice, "I am Katsubaki Sentaro, Lieutenant Yadi, please teach me." After simple refreshments, the ceremony ended, and Captain Yukatake kept Yadi behind alone. Yadi-kun, Yukatake looked at the budding wisteria in the courtyard and said slowly, "I know that you chose the 13th Division not just because you could be a lieutenant here, right?" Yadi did not deny it, nodded and said, "Yes, I want to go to the human world to take a look, Captain." Captain Yukatake also nodded understandingly. The 13th Division is the first vanguard stationed in the human world. It has heavy responsibilities, and the matters to be handled are quite complex. You have many clones. I will arrange for your clones to go to the human world. There, you have considerable autonomy, but remember, purifying hollows and guiding souls are the primary duties of soul reapers. Do not indulge in the life of the human world. I understand, Captain Yukatake, please rest assured. Yadi answered solemnly. deep in the First Division barracks, in a huge dojo. The floor of the dojo was as bright as a mirror, and the surrounding walls were built of special shakyoseki, enough to withstand the spiritual power impact of an ordinary captain level. At this moment, the center of the dojo was a scene of rage. Huh? Head Captain Yamamoto Genryusai Shichikuni gave a low roar. His Ryujin Jaka was not unsheathed, but the scabbard was wrapped in fiery, scorching spiritual pressure, sweeping out with the momentum of a thunderbolt. The Zanpakuto was not in Shikai. It was just exquisite swordsmanship combined with the basic use of the Zanpakuto, but its power had already distorted the air, and its might was comparable to high-level Hado. Boom! A figure was smashed away like a cannonball, hitting the shakyoseki wall heavily, making a dull, loud noise. The surface of the wall even showed fine cracks. That figure was one of Yadi's clones. The shihakusho on the clone was scorched and damaged in many places, and the body was twitching slightly. It was obviously severely injured, but the clone did not dissipate. Instead, the body was slowly recovering. HMPH, is this only the extent of it? Your purity is too low, Yadi. Head Captain Yamamoto stood with his sword retracted, his beard and hair bristling, and said in a deep voice, "Your clone is indeed unique. Not only is it durable, but it can also recover. But this should not be the reason for you to slack off in swordsmanship. Remember, the essence of swordsmanship lies in condensation. Only by concentrating will, spiritual pressure, and strength into one point can you erupt with the power to cut through everything." Cough, cough, yes, Head Captain. The Yadi who hit the wall struggled to stand up, but his eyes were more focused. "Have you rested enough?" the Head Captain said in a deep voice. Ready at any time, the Yadi clone in the field narrowed his eyes. "Very good." Yamamoto's eyes flashed, his figure disappeared instantly, and the next moment he appeared in front of the clone, and a simple but straight punch containing the power to collapse mountains and split rocks blasted towards his face. The essence of Shunpo lies in flexibility and surprise. Feel the flow of Rise-He, the trembling of space, dodge. Yadi's clone's pupils shrank, twisting his body to the limit, narrowly avoiding the terrifying fist wind. The fist pressure grazed his cheek, bringing a stinging pain. Yadi did not dare to have any hesitation. Spiritual pressure erupted under his feet, trying to use Shunpo to distance himself. Too slow. Yamamoto followed like a shadow, and the hilt of the Zanpakuto smashed towards the clone's waist and abdomen with great force. Hakuta is an extension of the body and also an embodiment of will. Every muscle, every bone must be born for battle. Block. Bang! Another dull sound. The clone barely blocked the hilt with his arms. The huge force made his feet plow 2 deep trenches on the floor, and a bone-cracking pain came from his arms. I can see the trajectory of the moves, but I can't dodge them. This feeling is like... Yadi gritted his teeth, persisting in attack after attack, vaguely feeling something strange. The Head Captain's attacks are like Hado after chanting. Every slash is amplified by the outside world, and every Hakuta makes the surrounding Rise-He respond. Inside the dojo, the Head Captain's stern reprimands, the sounds of violent spiritual pressure colliding, and the dull thuds of the Yadi clone being knocked down and climbing back up again continued to come out. Deep in the Serete, the underground passage of the Kaido Corps headquarters was far more tortuous and deep than imagined. This was not a simple downward extension, but rather like walking in the winding intestines of some huge creature. The tunnel wall was not rock, but a special black material, engraved with dense Kaido runes, emitting constant spiritual pressure fluctuations, maintaining the stability of the passage. Leading the Yadi clone forward was the current Grand Kaido Chief of the Kaido Corps, Grand Kaido Chief Hyakian Taiksen. He was wearing a deep purple traditional robe embroidered with complex Kaido patterns, and he was leaning on a bone staff with a large bead embedded at the top. The staff tapped the ground gently with his steps, making a dull and rhythmic thud, thud sound. "Follow closely, kid." Grand Kaido Chief Hyakian Taiksen said in a low voice. "The road below is constantly changing. If you take one wrong step, even your undying clone will be banished by spatial turbulence to who knows where." The Yadi clone kept a distance of 1 step and followed silently. He could feel the powerful and precise sealing jutsu barriers everywhere in the tunnel. Since you have already sat in the position of Deputy Grand Kaido Chief. Grand Kaido Chief Hyakian Taiksen did not look back, his voice echoing in the narrow tunnel. There are some things that you must know. Before you, the previous Grand Kaido Chief and Deputy Grand Kaido Chief, HMPH, those were two idiots. What did they do? The Yati clone asked at the right time. One was experimented on with holofication, and the other assisted the criminal in escaping. Grand Kaido Chief Hyakian Taiksen spat out a few words. The previous 12th Division captain colluded with hollows to conduct forbidden experiments that were strictly prohibited, eventually leading to the holofication of the Deputy Grand Kaido Chief and several captains. Grand Kaido Chief Hyakian Taiksen paused. His bone staff heavily struck the ground, making a thud sound, and the runes on the tunnel wall lit up instantly. After the matter was exposed, Central 46 was furious. But before the trial was over, the former Grand Kaido Chief used a forbidden technique to take those people and escape, and their whereabouts are still unknown. The Yati clone's eyes moved slightly. This was the ins and outs of the Captain holofication incident known to the Serite. Hachujin Ashoda, it's a pity. Grand Kaido Chief Hyakian Taiksen's tone softened slightly, with a trace of complexity. He was a true Kaido genius, with a pure heart, only wanting to study the ultimate of Kaido. Unfortunately, he served in the stealth force in his early years and spent a period of time with that defecting former 12th Division captain. They had a deep friendship. The passage seemed to begin to tilt downward, and the surrounding temperature seemed to drop by a few degrees. Actually, Grand Kaido Chief Hyakian Taiksen suddenly changed the subject and said, "These things, these charges for our core inheritors of the Kaido Corps, do not matter at all." The Yati clone raised his eyebrows slightly and looked at the old man's back. Grand Kaido Chief Hyakian Taiksen stopped, slowly turned around and said to Yati, "As long as you have the aptitude to learn those secret techniques, as long as I return to the Soul Society Serite, let alone colluding with hollows, it wouldn't matter even if you yourself were a hollow. Because our mission is directly related to the survival and safety of the three realms. Personal honor and disgrace, and the boundaries of factions, are not worth mentioning in the face of a true overturning crisis. So you must also put away your other thoughts and study these secret techniques hard." After speaking, he did not speak anymore and turned to continue moving forward. The Yati clone followed silently, but waves were stirred up in his heart. The information revealed by the Grand Kaido Chief was huge, and it also gave Yati a profound understanding of the secret techniques he was about to come into contact with and the so-called safety of the three realms. I don't know how many turns were taken, or how many layers of invisible spiritual pressure barriers were passed, but the scene in front suddenly opened up. A huge underground space that could not be described in words appeared before his eyes. The center of the space was a huge ceremonial venue composed of countless layers of concentric circles. Each layer of the ring was made of different materials: dark shakyoseki, crystal pipes flowing with liquid raizhi black metal engraved with golden runes, layered and nested, precise and complex to the extreme. The most frightening thing was around the venue, along the rock wall at the edge of the space. Countless special sealing devices were densely embedded. In every device, a hollow of different shapes was imprisoned, from the lowest level fodder hollow to the Menos grand level hollow, and one could even faintly perceive the terrifying aura of even higher level hollows. They were bound by powerful Kaido chains, pierced by pipes injecting special solutions, and fixed in niches like specimens. "We have arrived." Grand Kaido Chief Hyakian Taiksen raised his bone staff and pointed to the center of the huge ceremonial field, saying, "This is Giksu." It is also the place closest to Hell in the gap between the Soul Society and Hell. It is one of the endpoints of the Raizhi cycle and the levee guarded by our Kaido Corps. The Yati clone stood at the edge of the space, feeling the faint tremor coming from under his feet, and the gazes mixed with hatred and fear projected from the eyes of countless hollows. Yati finally understood why Grand Kaido Chief Hyakian Taiksen would say those words. Here, personal good and evil and factional affiliation seem to be truly crushed by some pressure comparable to the world. The cultivation of the secret techniques will also be carried out here. Chapter 69, The Present World. Soul Society, Western Rukengai. Shiba Clan Mansion. In the outskirts of Western Rukengai, deep beneath a house that looked like it had been built haphazardly, Yadi's main body was sunk into a large armchair, surrounded by mountains of scrolls and books. This was the mansion of the Shiba clan, one of the former 5 great noble families. The Shiba clan controlled the secret passage to the royal palace and was a very safe haven in the Soul Society. Footsteps sounded outside the door, accompanied by the familiar scent of tobacco. Shiba Kyukaku leaned against the doorway of the study, her gaze falling on Yadi as he read, her expression somewhat complex. "Hey, brat." Shiba Kyukaku spoke in a slightly deep voice. "I heard you became the lieutenant of the 13th Division." Yadi looked up from the pile of books and replied, "Yes, just appointed." Kyukaku was silent for a moment, her fingertips unconsciously rubbing her wooden pipe. The position of lieutenant of the 13th Division had once belonged to her older brother, Shiba Kyan. That figure, bright as sunshine, who had ultimately vanished in the battle against a hollow, more than a decade of time, had not completely smoothed over the scar in Shiba Kyukaku's heart. Tisk, Shiba Kyukaku finally just clicked her tongue, suppressing the complexity in her heart, and said casually, "Not bad, didn't embarrass yourself." Shiba Kyukaku immediately changed the subject. "What are you digging for in these antiques?" "I need more specific intelligence on the living world." Kyukaku raised her eyebrows, paced inside, kicked aside a few books on the floor at will, and pulled up a chair for herself to sit down. The living world, simply put, it's the other side of the mirror to us. The Soul Society is a world of souls, full of Raizhi. The living world is a world of matter, full of Kishi. Matter wrapped around souls, that's what the living world is like. After the living in the world die, those with grave sins are led to hell. Those bewitched by hollows become hollows and go to Huko Mundo. The remaining ordinary souls are guided to us. Shiba Kyukaku paused, spun the pipe between her fingers, and then said, "But the living world isn't just ordinary people. Some guys are born with the ability to use the Raizhi hidden within Kishi. For example, the Quincy. They are a group of guys who use bows and arrows and can extract Raizhi in a predatory way. They used to be very prominent and could be said to be the rulers of the living world, but now they have basically disappeared. There is another even rarer type, Fullbringers." Shiba Kyukaku said with a strange interest in her tone. "Their power isn't extracting Raizhi, but residing in some object they deeply love, stimulating the soul traits of the object and turning them into all sorts of strange abilities. Their numbers are pitifully small, but if you run into a powerful one..." Kyukaku hummed and laughed. Even captain-level fighters might not be able to withstand their bizarre abilities. As for life in the living world, it's much more exciting than our lifeless place. The things humans tinker with using Kishi are what you call interesting. Those metal boxes that run, those little boards that can transmit voices over thousands of miles, and those huge fireworks that can send people into the sky. The things we replicate here using Raizhi probably don't even count as the fur on the surface. As she spoke, Shiba Kyukaku seemed to remember something, took a palm-sized, flat metal plate shimmering with faint Raizhi light from her bosom, and said, "Here, a replica Raizhi communication board. It can only transmit some text and images over short distances. It's far worse than the genuine ones in the living world." Just then, a flurry of hurried footsteps, accompanied by exclamations, approached from afar. "Big sis, it's bad." A young man wearing the Shiba family uniform rushed to the study door, panting, with a panicked expression on his face. Next to the Ikaraku Tavern in the West 3rd District, some pervert is fighting. They're fighting like the world is ending. The roof has been blown off, and 2 squads of patrolling Shinigami have gone, but they haven't been able to suppress it. Shiba Kyukaku's brows furrowed tightly. West 3rd District. Can residents of Rukengai make such a big commotion fighting? Most souls in Rukengai have thin Raizhi and are weak. They only need water to survive. Fighting at most means pushing each other. Blowing off a roof? Unheard of. Oh, next to the Ikaraku Tavern? Huh, Yadi's voice calmly interjected. I know about this. It should be people from the nobility acting. Huh. Shiba Ganju's loud voice followed immediately. He had appeared at the door at some point, looking gossipy and confused. How do you know? Weren't you just here gnawing on books? Yadi closed the scroll in his hand, a subtle curve appearing on his lips. Because one of the parties is one of my clone. Yadi watched as Shiba Kyukaku and Shiba Ganju's eyes widened instantly, and he added slowly. And that clone is currently wearing the face of that masked leader from the assessment. The study fell silent instantly. Shiba Kyukaku's gaze became incredibly sharp, and Shiba Ganju's mouth hung wide open, full of shock. Ganju suddenly burst into earth-shattering laughter, slapping his thigh. Yadi, you actually went to someone else's turf wearing the face of a dead man. But with the power of your clone, isn't it easy to clean up a few noble lackeys? Why are they fighting so fiercely? Even the roof was blown off. Are there experts? Yadi shook his head. That's the essence of fishing. If my clone shows overwhelming power and knocks people down in 2 or 3 moves, the people hiding in the dark will just be scared away or turtle up, never daring to show their heads again. Only by showing strength that is a 50-50 match, making them think that, with a little more effort, or if another companion comes, they can steadily take down this dead man, will they let the big fish come out. Shiba Kyukaku narrowed her eyes, staring closely at Yadi. Wait, Yadi. Your clone can turn into other people's appearances. The intelligence released by the Serete about you didn't mention this ability at all. Shiba Kyukaku's tone became solemn. What did such an ability mean? Infiltration, disguise, framing. Its potential danger, and the suspicion it could trigger, were enough to set off monstrous waves among the nobility. Yes, Yadi admitted frankly, explaining, because this form of clone is somewhat unique, so it was banned by Captain Commander Yamamoto. Unique, Kyukaku pursued. Yadi put down his book, his expression as calm as if he were stating an objective fact. The enemy clone is naked. The study fell into a dead silence. Shiba Ganju's face froze instantly, his mouth open wide enough to fit a fist, his eyes almost popping out. He looked at Yadi, then at Kyukaku, his brain seemingly crashing completely, unable to process the overly shocking information of a naked clone. Shiba Kyukaku's face seemed to stiffen for a few seconds, her eyes filled with shock and absurdity, as well as a hint of indescribable confusion. She even subconsciously lowered her head and quickly glanced at the tightly wrapped clothing on her own body. A few seconds later, Shiba Kyukaku suddenly raised her hand to cover her forehead, emitting a groan filled with deep helplessness. Old man Yamamoto, well done. The living world. The crescent moon hung in the night sky of Karakura town. The neon lights of the commercial street had long since gone out, leaving only streetlights casting dim, yellow halos on the empty streets. In the silence, a fine black crack appeared silently above the road. The next moment, a figure stepped out, setting foot on the road of the living world. Yadi's main body had truly stepped onto the land of Karakura town, known as a spiritually rich ground, for the first time. The air was filled with a scent completely different from the Soul Society. Dust, exhaust fumes, damp soil, and the faint, lingering noise of the material world coming from afar. Yadi lowered his head slightly, his gaze falling on an inconspicuous pebble at his feet. He squatted down and picked it up, the cold touch coming from his fingertips. Hum! A faint, imperceptible glow lit up in Yadi's palm. The hard stone instantly softened and disintegrated, turning into a fine, shimmering stream of material sand, which seeped into his skin silently through his fingers and disappeared without a trace. Yadi closed his eyes, carefully experiencing the subtle changes brought about by the material stream merging into his body. A throb of satisfaction came from deep within the Zanpakuto, as if it had encountered sweet rain after a long drought, but it immediately returned to silence, conveying a deeper level of craving. Kishi, it is indeed one of the powers needed for Bankai, but the type of matter, it's not quite right. The Zanpakuto only absorbed a small part. Yadi clenched his fist, feeling the negligible reserve of Kishi in his body, and thought to himself, It seems I need to stay here for a while. A few days later, on the edge of the bustling central business district of Karakura town, a funeral home with a rather unique style quietly opened for business. It lacked the gloom and solemnity of a traditional funeral home, looking more like a minimalist art gallery instead. Huge floor-to-ceiling glass windows replaced the thick walls. The interior was bright and soft, with light-colored wooden structures and green plants dotted throughout, creating a strange and peaceful atmosphere. The sign hanging above the door was simple and striking: Soul Reaper Funeral Home. What was most eye-catching on opening day was the easel set up at the shop entrance and the piles of wood. A man with a full head of white hair and an exceptionally tall, robust build sat there, his carving knife dancing in his hand as wood shavings fell in a rustle. His movements were precise and rhythmic, as if he were using his carving to awaken the souls sleeping within the wood. In just over 10 minutes, the slightly weary yet vibrant face of a young white-collar worker who had stopped to watch was vividly presented on a palm-sized wooden plaque. A free portrait as a memento. Yadi handed the plaque to her. Seeing the carving on the plaque that almost captured the very essence of her soul, the girl covered her mouth in surprise. News of the free wooden portrait spread like wildfire within the local area. Inside the shop, Yadi sat behind the reception desk. Ever since his Zanpakuto devoured the kizzy brought by that stone, it was like injecting a clear spring into withered seedlings. Although faint, it had truly expanded the boundaries of Yadi's abilities. Currently, among Yadi's main body and clone forms, in addition to the Soul Reaper form and the Hollow form, a third stable existence mode had appeared, the Kizzy form. However, the cost of this Kizzy form clone was quite expensive. It required Yadi to consume 30 liters of water, 20 kilograms of carbon, 4 liters of ammonia, 1.5 kilograms of lime, 800 grams of phosphorus, 250 grams of salt, 100 grams of saltpeter, 80 grams of sulfur, 7.5 grams of fluorine, 5 grams of iron, 3 grams of silicon, and small amounts of 15 other trace elements to create one Kizzy clone. Opening this funeral home was also a choice Yadi had made after careful consideration. It allowed him to legally and efficiently order the materials he needed, facilitated Yadi in guiding souls lingering in the living world, and also provided the perfect cover for Yadi to stay in the living world long-term. Sai, looking at another scrap of material in his hand that was about to be carved into a portrait, Yadi sighed softly and said, 3 days since opening, portrait appointments are booked until next week, and there are a few inquiries about custom urns, but I haven't received a single order for the main business, body processing. Yadi casually brought the wooden block to his mouth and took a bite, snapping off a corner to replenish the Kizzy reserves consumed within his body. Is the mortality rate in Karakura town this low? Should I really consider opening a branch in that legendary town where cases occur frequently, Bankai town? As soon as the thought arose, the sensor chime at the door emitted a crisp ding-dong sound. A haggard-looking middle-aged woman pushed the door open and entered. She was dressed elegantly, but her hair was now messy. Her eyes were red and swollen like walnuts, and her gaze was hollow and desperate. She almost stumbled to the reception desk, her voice hoarse and dry. Excuse me, is it here? Can you restore bodies?" Her gaze was fixed intently on the description of the body restoration service on the wall behind Yadi, as if she had grasped at a final straw. "My child, he was in a car accident. It was very serious. They said. The woman choked, almost unable to speak, her immense grief making her tremble all over. "I heard there is a very skilled sculptor here. Please, can you let him return to his original appearance? Even if, just a little bit, I still want to see him again, his complete form." She tremblingly pulled a photo from her handbag. The photo showed a boy with a sunny smile. "And can you carve a portrait for him?" The boy's brilliant smile in the photo formed a glaring contrast with the bottomless grief of the woman before him. Yadi's gaze swept over the photo and fell back onto the woman's face, which was filled with pleading. Yadi did not ask any more questions, just nodded calmly and said, "Certainly. Please tell me the address and contact information, and I will send a hearse to collect him." the black hearse carried the woman away from the funeral home. Although Yadi did not have a driver's license, his driving skills were actually quite good. A few hours later, the hearse returned with the woman and a stretcher covered in a white cloth. The air was filled with the scent of disinfectant and a faint smell of blood. Yadi personally guided the woman into a lounge where soft, soothing incense was burning and asked her to wait. In the treatment room next door, Yadi lifted the white cloth. The sight under the white cloth was shocking. The boy's once vibrant life had been twisted and torn by a massive external force, barely recognizable as human. Yadi watched in silence. Finally, Yadi closed his eyes, and the Kizzy reserves within his body were suddenly consumed. On the open space beside him, the space distorted slightly, and countless tiny particles, almost indistinguishable to the naked eye, emerged from thin air, rapidly stacking and shaping themselves like 3D printing. In the blink of an eye, a person identical to the boy in the photo appeared beside Yadi. Yadi's Kizzy clone walked to another coffin, lay inside, and closed its eyes. Yadi's main body covered it with a white sheet, revealing only a peaceful face. Subsequently, Yadi pushed the coffin into the quiet room where the woman was waiting. When the coffin lid slid open slowly, the woman threw herself onto the edge of the coffin, her fingers trembling as she stroked her child's intact cheek. The immense shock and the surreal feeling of having regained what was lost left her speechless for a moment, with only hot tears streaming out. "Zio Cheng, my little Zio Cheng." She sobbed uncontrollably, the pain and self-reproach she had suppressed for too long rushing out like a breached floodgate. "It's Mommy's fault. Mommy shouldn't have let you cross the street alone. Mommy didn't watch you properly. Mommy was wrong, Mommy was wrong." She rambled on, recounting her regrets, as if she wanted to tear her heart out and bury it beside the coffin. Yadi stood quietly to the side. At some point, he had picked up a piece of fine boxwood, and his carving knife danced lightly on the wood, with shavings flying everywhere. Every word the woman spoke, immersed in her grief, and every subtle expression from the boy's photo were incorporated into the rhythm of Yadi's fingertips. Meanwhile, in a corner of the scene of that tragic car accident several kilometers away, Yadi's Soul Reaper clone quietly appeared and used spiritual pressure to draw a complex soul burial mark in the air. This was the passage to guide lost souls to the Soul Society. The soul burial mark appeared on the soul's forehead, and the bewildered phantom of the boy slowly vanished. In the quiet room, the woman's crying gradually subsided, leaving only silent sobs. She stared blankly at the child's face in the coffin, as if she wanted to carve this final image into the depths of her soul. Yadi handed the lifelike wooden carving of the boy he had just finished to her. The boy on the wooden carving had a sunny smile just like in the photo, and his eyes seemed to carry longing for the future. The woman tremblingly took the wooden carving and held it tightly to her chest, as if holding a lost treasure she had regained. Her gaze moved back and forth between the wooden carving and the child in the coffin. Finally, she took a deep breath and said with a certain determination, "Cremate him." Her fingers stroked the cheek of the child in the coffin one last time, saying, "Let him leave cleanly. I will take his ashes home." The corner of Yadi's mouth twitched imperceptibly. He looked at the perfect clone he had just created in the coffin, his heart feeling as if it were bleeding, but his expression remained calm and emotionless, and he just nodded steadily and said, "Understood." The heavy coffin was slowly pushed into the professional high-temperature cremator. The moment the furnace door closed, Yadi's Soul Reaper clone was already standing deep inside the furnace. He raised his hand expressionlessly, the faint blue spiritual pressure at his fingertips instantly condensing to the extreme. Hado 33, Sakitsui. The woman outside watched from the window above as her child was engulfed by a flame, her eyes becoming vacant once again. A few minutes later, the furnace door opened. Yadi's expression was solemn as he walked out holding a simple and elegant urn, which contained the ashes left after the cremation of the remains of the real boy named Zio Cheng. The woman took the urn solemnly and held it tightly in her arms along with the lifelike wooden carving. She did not cry anymore, just bowed deeply to Yadi and turned to leave. Although her back was still thin, it seemed to have straightened slightly. Yadi's first real business transaction was over. Yadi stood in the empty treatment room, his mind contemplating the shortcomings of what had just happened. Using a clone is ultimately a shortcut, and it is also a waste. Yadi whispered to himself, looking at his fingertips with which he had just tried to repair the body but achieved little effect, and said, "Moreover, it is not respectful enough to the deceased themselves. It seems I need to research how to use the power of Kizzy to repair the damage to Kizzy." Chapter 70, An Encounter. The Living World, Karakura Town. The night in Karakura Town was bathed in the light of a massive, bright full moon. The cold, silvery radiance spilled into the courtyard of the funeral home. In a corner of the courtyard, Yadi, in his clone form, was crouching on the ground, facing a pile of charred, twisted remains that barely maintained a human shape. These were exactly those scrapped clone remains. Yadi held a special carving knife, its tip flowing with faint spiritual light, carefully removing the unreclaimable parts from the remains. Eventually, bits of clone debris containing massive amounts of spiritual particles were picked out by Yadi and collected into a special lead box. Better than nothing, but as a sacrifice for the Kaido Corps, it counts as recycling waste. Yadi thought to himself. Just as Yadi was focused on his work, a small figure appeared silently under the porch of the funeral home's main entrance. It was a little girl wearing a dirty dress. Her complexion was a sickly pale, and her hair was dry and stuck to her scalp. The most unsettling part was her eyes. They were hollow, devoid of any luster, like two bottomless black holes, staring straight at Yadi, who was crouching in the corner of the courtyard. Yadi's carving knife paused slightly. He slowly raised his head, meeting those hollow eyes. There was no surprise on his face. In his heart, he had already confirmed the little girl's identity. This was a hollow in disguise. On the 13th Division's wanted list, there was one belonging to a hollow skilled in mimicry, which lured and killed special souls in the form of a child. This hollow was likely attracted by the unique spiritual pressure fluctuations emitted when Yadi was processing the clone remains. Yadi stood up, his face wearing the professional, gentle smile of a funeral home owner, and walked toward the entrance. "Welcome to the Shinigami Funeral Home." Yadi's voice said clearly, "It's so late, little girl. Did someone in your family die? Do you need my help?" The little girl remained silent, her hollow eyes slowly turning as Yadi approached. When Yadi was less than 3 steps away from her, a sudden change occurred. "Ripped!" A sound like thick cloth being violently torn erupted. The little girl's seemingly thin body split open from the center. Instead of flesh and blood, fur and sharp bone spurs surged out. The split scalp flipped back like 2 tattered curtains, revealing the terrifying true form hidden behind it, a hollow nearly 2 meters tall, resembling an ape. The hollow wore a massive bone mask on its face. Its claws swiped down at Yadi, who was within arm's reach, with speed so fast it left only afterimages. "Waya moan monster, help someone save me." Yadi's smiling expression was instantly replaced by terror. He stumbled backward, appearing as if he were truly frightened to the point of soul flying away and spirit scattering, scrambling to escape into the depths of the courtyard. Just as those razor-sharp claws were about to touch Yadi's back. "Bastard, stay away from him." A roar full of anger and anxiety exploded like thunder. An orange-haired figure descended from the sky like a cannonball. A massive Zanpakuto, carrying a whistling wind pressure, slashed fiercely at the attacking claws of the hollow. Clang! The ear-piercing sound of metal clashing made the air tremble, and sparks flew everywhere. The orange-haired youth, Kurosaki Ichigo, felt his arm go numb from the massive recoil, yet he held firm against this blow. Kurosaki Ichigo's eyes burned with raging anger as he stared at the hollow's hideous mask and claws. A bone-deep hatred instantly engulfed him. It was this mimicry. It was this hollow, that rainy night, the hollow that killed his mother. "It's you," Kurosaki Ichigo roared. At the same time, another petite figure appeared beside Yadi like a ghost, grabbing Yadi's arm and dragging him violently away from the danger zone. "Get out of here quickly," Kuchiki Rukia, wearing a sailor uniform, said in a slightly rushed voice. Her expression was equally grave, her eyes locked tightly onto the hollow entangled with Ichigo. Damn brat, the hollow roared in anger. Completely enraged by Kurosaki Ichigo's interference, its offensive became even more frenzied. Ichigo, who had only recently gained Shinigami powers, fought without any technique due to the combination of rage and inexperience. He was completely suppressed by the hollow's power and speed, instantly receiving several bloody wounds, and was forced back step by step, facing imminent danger. Damn it! Ichigo gritted his teeth and held on, swinging his massive Zanpakuto until it was an impenetrable wall, but it became increasingly difficult. Just as the hollow's claws were about to pierce his chest, an unprecedented resolve erupted in Ichigo's eyes. He abandoned all defense, gripped the hilt of his Zanpakuto with both hands, poured all his strength into it, and delivered a full-force slash toward the bone mask on the hollow's chest. Fall down. The massive blade, carrying immense force, finally shattered the hollow's mask. Accompanied by a shrill, extreme wail, the massive hollow body disintegrated instantly like a popped balloon, turning into black spiritual particle debris that slowly dissipated under the moonlight. Kurosaki Ichigo leaned on his Zanpakuto, breathing heavily, sweat soaking his bangs, his eyes fixed on the spot where the hollow had dissipated. Kurosaki Ichigo's heart was filled with the relief of revenge and a deeper, more profound sorrow. Truly a powerful strength young man. Yadi walked out from behind Rukia and nodded slightly to Ichigo, saying, "Thank you very much. If you hadn't saved me, I'm afraid I would have gone to see the Shinigami today." Kurosaki Ichigo, panting and wiping the sweat from his face, was about to say something when he was interrupted by the crisp, abrupt sound of wooden clogs. Click, click, click. A figure wearing a green and white striped bucket hat and leaning on a red lacquered cane strolled into the funeral home's courtyard. The moonlight illuminated the playful smile under his hat brim and his iconic small mustache. Yer Tilda. Urahara Kisuk tapped his palm gently with his fan and spoke softly. How fortunate, Tilda, I didn't expect that near my shop there would actually be a vice captain of the 13th Division, running such a, unique funeral home. Tonight's moonlight seems to favor Karakura Town exceptionally well. TH, 13th Division Vice Captain. Kurosaki Ichigo looked blank, not understanding a word of what Urahara Kisuk said. Vice Captain, Kuchiki Rukia gasped, looking at Yadi in disbelief. She trusted that Urahara Kisuk's intelligence wouldn't be wrong, but the person in front of her clearly radiated the aura of a living person, without the unique feeling of a Gige. He was just a solid human. How could a Shinigami vice captain exist in the living world in human form for a long time? This completely overturned her understanding. Yadi looked at Urahara Kisuk, then at the shocked Rukia and the bewildered Ichigo, a helpless smile appearing on his face. There are truly many guests tonight. Everyone, standing in the courtyard to talk, is not very polite. Why not come inside? In the lounge, the four sat around a low table. Yadi skillfully brewed tea, the fragrance of tea curling in the air. Kurosaki Ichigo realized that the person he saved today was somewhat special, so he asked continuously, "Hey, wait, what is this 13th Division you're talking about? And what is a vice captain? Also, aren't Shinigami all spirits like this one? How can you be a human, and you run a funeral home?" Urahara Kisuk waved his small fan, smiling as he acted as the narrator. Mr. Kurosaki, the 13th Division is one of the squads of the Godai 13 of the Soul Society. You can understand it as a special armed organization that maintains the balance of the world. As for vice captain, well, it's probably the second in command, under the captain, managing hundreds of powerful Shinigami. Both power and strength are top-notch, Tilda. Rukia also suppressed the turbulent waves in her heart and added as concisely as possible. The 13th Division is responsible for protecting the balance of souls between the Soul Society and the living world and purifying hollows in the living world. For example, I belong to the 13th Division, and the vice captain is the position second only to the captain within the squad. Before I came to the living world, no one in the squad held the position of vice captain. Yadi pushed the teacups in front of everyone and said, "When I became vice captain, Officer Kuchiki had already been sent to the living world to be stationed. As for why I look like a human, it's simple, just a clone." Clone. Yadi picked up his teacup, took a sip, and said, My Zanpakuto's Bankai ability is quite special. One of its applications is creating clones. I didn't come to the living world to work, so using a Shinigami in spiritual particle form is really boring. Yadi put down his teacup and said, So, I created this current one, which is composed entirely of the matter that makes up a human body. It looks, feels, and even measures on instruments like a living, breathing person. It's perfect for running a shop and living in the living world. Matter clone. Urahara Kisuke's fan-waving motion stopped for the first time. His eyes, full of dark circles, opened slightly, and he thought to himself, completely composed of matter from the living world, yet carrying the will and power of a vice-captain level, this is simply unheard of. Even as knowledgeable as he was shocked by this concept. This was no longer a simple clone technique, but a forbidden domain that touched upon matter and soul, existence and form. Rukia was even more dumbfounded, her gaze toward Yadi filled with awe and disbelief. So that's it. Rukia struggled to digest Yadi's information, then thought of a more realistic question. Then, where did you get the money to open this funeral home? I remember that Soul Society currency cannot circulate in the living world. She really couldn't imagine a Shinigami who had just arrived in the living world being able to come up with such a large sum of money to purchase property, renovate, and buy equipment. Yadi's expression became a bit subtle as he explained. As for that, it's also very simple. I had another clone copy the appearance and identity information of a certain local person and applied for several loans in his name. The paperwork was complete and the process was compliant. Isn't this fraud? It's illegal. Kuchiki Rukia was so shocked she almost jumped up. Illegal? Yadi raised an eyebrow and said with a smile, How could it be? The clone that applied for the loan, after successfully sending the cashed money over, voluntarily turned itself into the police station. It is currently reflecting on its actions in some prison. The entire process fully complies with the laws and regulations of the living world, so how can you say it's illegal? Kurosaki Ichigo's mouth twitched as he heard this. This works too. Urahara Kisuke covered his mouth with his fan and said with a smile, My, what a unique financing method, Vice Captain. You fully respect the rules of the game in the living world. I admire. Kuchiki Rukia covered her forehead with a hopeless expression, feeling that her worldview had been hit like never before. All right, don't be so nervous, Officer Kuchiki. Yadi couldn't help but laugh as he looked at Rukia's expression, as if the sky had fallen. I said, I didn't come to the living world to work. Without orders, I won't meddle in other people's business. These words caused Kuchiki Rukia's tense nerves to relax by more than half. She let out a long sigh of relief, and her gaze toward Yadi held a bit more gratitude. The atmosphere in the lounge eased instantly, and the four chatted for a while longer, with topics revolving around life in Karakura town and interesting tidbits about the living world. The night grew deeper, and the tea turned cold. Urahara Kisuke was the first to stand up. Oh my, it's getting late. If I don't go back, someone will be worried. Vice Captain, tonight was truly an eye-opener. Thank you for your hospitality. Kurosaki Ichigo also stood up, scratched his orange hair, and said, I have to go back too. I have classes tomorrow. Uncle, Mr. Vice Captain, thank you for the tea, and your shop is pretty cool. Rukia stood up as well, bowed respectfully to Yadi, and said, Vice Captain, thank you for your time. We shall take our leave. Yadi stood under the porch, watching the three figures blend into the street shrouded in moonlight, and thought to himself, Kurosaki Ichigo and Kuchiki Rukia are one thing, but even Urahara Kisuke came in person. Kuchiki Rukia's Shinigami powers have already been transferred, and Kurosaki Ichigo just killed the hollow that changed his destiny. However, it doesn't matter. No matter how much the plot fluctuates, as long as I find a safe haven, it cannot affect me. Yadi's safe haven was never within the walls of the Serite, nor was it on the desert of Hukomundo. Once I learn 3 more secret arts of the Kaido Corps, I can go to hell, and besides, Yadi's focus returned to his Zanpakuto. Is the power of hell the embodiment of pure sin and punishment, or some kind of primordial power that forms the foundation of the world. Yadi's Zampicudo seemed to crave all the power that constituted the world. The spiritual particles of the soul society, the matter of the living world, the spiritual particles of Huco Mundo, all were devoured by it. So what about the power of hell? That legendary, terrifying energy capable of annihilating captain-level Shinigami and imprisoning ancient great hollows. Was it also one of the powers needed for the Zampicudo's Bankai? In the courtyard, Yadi returned to the pile of charred clone remains, crouched down, and continued his work. Kuchiki Rukia had already put on Urahara Kisuk's Gige, and the Hagioku was fused within her body. Being dragged back to the Soul Society was almost a certainty. And with Kurosaki Ichigo's personality, breaking into the Serite was also an inevitable choice. At the very least, this part of the plot would not change no matter what. At that time, the eyes of the entire Soul Society would be firmly attracted by this small Ryoka team. Yadi decided to take this opportunity to add his own power to the Ryoka team and test the mettle of those nobles. After all, it hadn't been long since the Zudeo Rift incident. All right, legends, that's it for today. If you're ready for the next chapter, smash that like button and flood the comments right now. Remember, we've got 3 days to prove this story needs to continue. Subscribe so you don't miss the drop, and I'll meet you in the next audiobook.